Chapter 899. The majestic sight of the ruins of Huan made Zhang Xiaohua sigh. When he saw the lightning flashing under the dark clouds from afar, he had already imagined that the deserted island in the sea would be covered in red clouds. However, not only was the boundless dark clouds in the sky out of his expectations, even the huge ruins of Huan in front of him left him dumbfounded. He could not believe that the ruins of Huan were really the ruins of ruins. Just as he was thinking, a few disciples came from afar with their lightness techniques. They shouted from afar, "Where are you from? How dare you come to the forbidden area of the sect?" Zhang Xiaohua's expression didn't change. When the four of them came closer, he took out his waist token and handed it over. He said gently, "I am the disciple of Emo Shuigong's guardian. This is my waist token." Emo Shuigong? Guardian disciple? Everyone was stunned and looked at each other. They were really surprised. Emo Shuigong was a female disciple and was their senior sister. They had never heard of a guardian disciple. One of them took Zhang Xiaohua's waist token with vigilance and checked it carefully. It was exactly the same as Emo Shuigong's waist token. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's attire, it was similar to the attire of Ruijin Hall. Ren Wufeng wasn't sure and passed the waist token to the others to check. He then cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother, I am Ren Wufeng, a disciple of Ruijin Hall. May I know your name?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "That's right. My surname is also Ren, and my name is Xiaoyao." Ren Xiaoyao? Ren Wufeng frowned. This name was unfamiliar, and he had never heard of it. He asked embarrassedly, "Ren? Senior brother, forgive me for being slow. I have never heard of the position of guardian disciple in Emo Shuigong on Lingxiang Peak. Guardian disciple and guardian disciple are the responsibilities of Ruijin Hall's disciples. Oh, it's not that I don't trust you. It's just that this forbidden area of the ruins of Huan is also an important place of our sect. If I'm not careful, I'm afraid I'll disappoint the sect leader." Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "It doesn't matter. Just a month ago, I was appointed by Jiaozhu Darren as a protector disciple. It's the first time in recent years that Shidi is suspicious. Junior Marshal brother, please verify the authenticity of the waist token first." The disciples spread the word among themselves and exchanged glances. They nodded slightly and returned the waist token to Zhang Xiaohua. Ren Wufeng smiled and said, "Senior brother Ren, this waist token is naturally real. May I know why senior brother has come to the ruins of Huan?" Zhang Xiaohua pretended to smile bitterly. "What can there be? Lord Sect Master is just testing me to come to Huan Su to receive Senior Marshal Sister Xiaqing and the others." Senior Marshal Sister Xia? Hearing this, Ren Wufeng's expression relaxed a little, but was also a little surprised. Xiaqing and the others had been in the ruins of Huan for more than half a month and had not come out. These disciples had been worried for a long time. Zhang Xiaohua's words indicated that she was a disciple of Emo Xiangong. Otherwise, she would not know the whereabouts of Xiaqing and the others. Secondly, this seemingly inconspicuous senior brother Ren was actually here to receive Xiaqing. Could this person's martial arts be higher than Senior Marshal Sister Xiaqing's? Zhang Xiaohua's words were usually said casually, but at this time, these disciples misunderstood. Abbess Jingyi had only sent him over to take a look and give some advice. However, after hearing what he said, coupled with the fact that Xiaqing and the others hadn't moved for a long time, these disciples thought that Zhang Xiaohua was here to help Xiaqing. Ren Wufeng was solemn and respectful. He cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Senior Marshal Brother Ren. Senior Marshal Sister Xia and the others have been in for a long time, but there was no news coming out. I was panicking and wanted to send this news back to Lingxiang Peak. I didn't expect Lord Sect Master to already know and send Senior Marshal Brother here in advance. Now I'm relieved." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua knew that these people had misunderstood her meaning. However, she looked at the lightning and thunder in the middle of the ruins of Huan, which was exactly where she wanted to go. She did not explain and cupped her hands. "In that case, please tell me the details of Senior Marshal Sister Xia's situation so that I know what's going on." "Yes, that's what I should do." Ren Wufeng nodded. "Senior Marshal Sister Xia and her group of 5 arrived here 20 days ago. They said that they were here on Lord Sect Master's orders to check on that thing. Senior Marshal Brother must know that someone was killed by the Divine Thunder a month ago at Lingxiang Peak. Lord Sect Master suspected that something had happened to that thing. In fact, I've been here for many years and that thing would occasionally move, but it shouldn't affect Lingxiang Peak. Of course, this is only my guess. That thing is incomparably mysterious. Perhaps its power is unknown. Of course, Ruins of Huan is the forbidden area of our cult of fragrance. Only Mo Nuagong's disciples can enter. We only patrol the periphery and monitor the changes of that thing. We don't dare to enter the interior. So when Senior Marshal Sister Xia came, I couldn't explain why. So Senior Marshal Sister Xia could only bring the others in to check. That thing? Zhang Xiaohua muttered in her heart. What is that thing? Why is it so mysterious? But, according to Ren Wufeng, that thing is a secret that all the inner disciples of the cult of fragrance know. It's not good for me to ask too much. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua could only vaguely ask, then where did Senior Marshal Sister Xia enter from? Are you sure? That thing is a little strange? Ren Wufeng pointed with his finger and said, Of course. I've been patrolling this place for a long time, and I can still see this abnormality. On the day that Lord Sect Master asked about it, there was a 5-colored ray of light that flew away, but the direction was a little off. It wasn't facing Lingxiang Peak. And Senior Marshal Sister Xia entered from here. It was us who sent her over. Yes. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the direction Ren Wufeng was pointing at and said casually, That thing will emit a 5-colored ray of light every once in a while? It's not fixed. Anyway, I haven't figured out the pattern. Yes, that thing. Why would it emit a 5-colored ray of light? Haha. Ren Wufeng laughed and said, About this? Senior Marshal Brother Ren, you're testing me. Didn't I say just now that I've never entered the ruins of Huan before? How would I know what that thing looks like? Perhaps only Lord Sect Master and the disciples of Mo Xian Palace who have entered before would know what that thing is. He. Zhang Xiaohua understood and smiled. I'm just asking casually. Junior Brother Ren, please don't blame me. Then, she said, saving people is like putting out a fire. If there's nothing else, I'll go in now. Junior Brother Ren, what do you think? Now? Ren Wufeng was stunned. He turned to look at the disciples beside him and asked curiously, Senior Marshal Brother Ren, you don't know about the ruins of Huan? Zhang Xiaohua knew that she was wrong and did not hide it anymore. She smiled and said, That's right. I only knew about the ruins of Huan in the past and did not know the details inside. Moreover, I was sent here by Lord Sect Master when I entered Mo Xian Palace. He did not explain in detail. I have to ask Junior Brother Ren for advice about the whole story. Oh, I see. Ren Wufeng was enlightened and nodded. Since Senior Marshal Brother Ren doesn't know, I'll explain it briefly. I can't say that I'm asking for advice. I just heard some things from the disciples of Mo Xian Palace. By the way, Senior Marshal Brother Ren, have you heard of the Orchid Dusk refinement? Of course. Every disciple should know about the famous Orchid Dusk refinement of our fragrant cult. Yes, I'll let Senior Marshal Brother Ren know. I heard that the size of the ruins of Huan is bigger than the Orchid Prairie. Moreover, there are many ferocious beasts in the Orchid Prairie. It's the same in the ruins of Huan. There are ferocious beasts in here too? Zhang Xiaohua was a little shocked. She looked at the pile of ruins and asked, What do they eat? Ren Wufeng shrugged and said, I've also heard rumors. However, I've seen the saber-toothed tigers in the outermost layer. As for what they live on, I don't know. Saber-toothed tigers? How are they compared to the thunder tiger? Zhang Xiaohua asked. There shouldn't be much of a comparison, Ren Wufeng said with a bitter face. The saber-toothed tigers in the ruins of Huan are ferocious beasts that even the female disciples of Mo Xian Palace have to avoid. How can they be compared to the thunder tiger? So powerful, Zhang Xiaohua frowned. Of course, if not, the time to enter the ruins of Huan is not fixed. We can only enter calmly when the saber-toothed tigers do not appear and reduce the chances of encountering the saber-toothed tigers. Oh. Zhang Xiaohua raised her head. At this moment, the sky above the ruins of Huan was dark. How could there be sunlight? Seeing this, Ren Wufeng smiled and said, Senior Martial Brother Ren, don't be anxious. There's still an hour and it'll be the noon. I'll remind you. All right, other than the saber-toothed tigers, what other ferocious beasts are there? What about the blood wolves and giant apes? Haha, Senior Martial Brother, you must be joking. Those are the ferocious beasts in the Orchid Prairie. How can there be any in the ruins of Huan? According to the Senior Martial Sister who went in, other than the saber-toothed tigers, there are also the heaven-reaching ape, earth-splitting rhinoceros, fire wolf, and mountain-shaking bear. As for their specific strengths, the Senior Martial Sisters are rather afraid of them and do not mention them. Therefore, I don't dare to guess rashly. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I'm already very grateful that Junior Brother Ren can say so much. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua did not have any reaction on her face, Ren Wufeng said anxiously, Senior Martial Brother Ren, you should not be careless. These ferocious beasts are not like the ones refined by Yulan Mu. Even if the disciples of Emo Xiangong went in and encountered them, they would avoid them if possible. If they really could not avoid them, they would escape. Unless they really could not escape, they would fight with them. As for those who fought with them, according to the Senior Martial Sisters, they only have a 50-50 chance of survival. They are not confident at all. So powerful? Zhang Xiaohua frowned. He had seen Peacock's martial arts before. Based on this, he could deduce the other disciples. Such martial arts only had a 50-50 chance of survival in the ruins of Huan. It was appropriate to use the ruins of Huan as an example of a dragon's pool and a tiger's den. It seems that the ruins of Huan is really the forbidden area of the fragrant cult. In this case, should we still enter the forbidden area? Zhang Xiaohua immediately hesitated. At this moment, Ren Wufeng shouted, Senior Martial Brother Ren, look, that is the saber-toothed tiger. Zhang Xiaohua raised her head and looked in the direction of Ren Wufeng's finger. She saw a few ferocious beasts slowly walking past the huge pillar. When she saw them clearly, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be shocked. Calm, there are more chapters. -4. Chapter 900. The collapsed pillars were scattered between the walls. There were a few extremely tall tiger-shaped ferocious beasts. What surprised Zhang Xiaohua the most was that these tiger-shaped ferocious beasts had long sword-like fangs that protruded from both sides of their mouths. That should be where the saber-toothed tiger got its name from. At this moment, the saber-toothed tiger seemed to have sensed the movement here. It raised its head and saw Zhang Xiaohua and the others. Woo! It let out a long hiss and charged towards them. The others followed closely behind. Zhang Xiaohua was alarmed. Just as she was about to make a move, she heard Ren Wufeng chuckling and saying, Senior Brother Ren, don't be anxious. This beast can only stay in the Huan Su and won't be able to take half a step out. There's no need to be afraid. Looking at the others, they were all as steady as Mount Tai and had relaxed expressions. Could it be that the Huan Su is like the Yulon Grand Canyon and also has a restriction? They were still a few meters away from the Huan Su, and Zhang Xiaohua's divine perception couldn't reach it. Sure enough, the saber-toothed tiger was agile and easily jumped over the tall pillars and the abandoned walls. It didn't take long for it to get close. However, just like the Yulon Grand Canyon, the saber-toothed tiger stopped when it was still a distance away from the edge of the ruins. It opened its bloody mouth and protruded its sword-like fangs. It roared at Zhang Xiaohua and the others as if it was demonstrating its power. The other saber-toothed tigers did the same. After a long time, perhaps they were tired. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua and the others were only looking at them indifferently, the saber-toothed tigers turned around and continued to walk in the direction they were heading in. After the saber-toothed tigers were far away, Zhang Xiaohua said thoughtfully, Junior Brother Ren, this Huan Su, is there something similar to the Great Mountain Protecting Array? Ren Wufeng glanced at Zhang Xiaohua with a hint of meaning in his eyes and smiled. Senior Brother Ren is indeed wise. That's right. I heard from Senior Sister Emo Shuigong that the entire ruins of Huan is an enormous formation, even more powerful than the Yulon Grand Canyon. However, I've only heard of it and have never been inside. I don't have the fate to see it either. Then, can we see all the monsters that Junior Apprentice Brother Ren mentioned just now? Ren Wufeng shook his head. That's not it. I've only seen saber-toothed tigers here. I've never seen any other beasts before. Perhaps it's inside. Oh, I see. Zhang Xiaohua frowned. Based on past experience, the closer one was to the periphery of the array, the weaker the ferocious beasts would be. They would be able to encounter a saber-toothed tiger at the outermost area of Huansu. Looking at that saber-toothed tiger's vigorous figure and ferocious appearance, it was definitely not something to be trifled with. As for the other ferocious beasts, there was no need to talk about them. This ruins of Huan, should he still enter it? Zhang Xiaohua was a little hesitant. However, at this moment, a huge bolt of lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Suddenly, a five-colored ray of light appeared below the bolt of lightning. With a whoosh, it flew towards the southwest. "Look, senior brother Ren," Ren Wufeng shouted. "That's the ray of light emitted by that thing. I don't know what it's used for. There seems to be too much of it this time." "That's right. What is it used for? What is that thing?" Zhang Xiaohua was also astonished. However, he suddenly had a strong feeling in his heart. It was a feeling that he wanted to take that thing for himself. It was a feeling that this thing was extremely important to him. How does this thing have anything to do with me?" Zhang Xiaohua was aghast. Then, he turned around and asked Ren Wufeng, "Junior brother Ren, are you sure that this ray of light is the same as the one that struck our lingering fragrance peak?" Ren Wufeng shook his head. "That day, I told Lord Sect Leader clearly that when the lightning struck lingering fragrance peak, there was indeed a five-colored ray of light. However, the direction was not lingering fragrance peak. As for where this ray of light went, and whether it was lightning or not, I have no idea." Then, he smiled and said, "If I knew, wouldn't Senior Sister Xia and the rest not have to go in?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded slightly. Previously, he had wanted to go in. Now that his mind was affected, all the more he wanted to go in and take a look. As for the ferocious beasts, he would deal with them accordingly. "All right, senior brother Ren, you can go in now." Just as Zhang Xiaohua was pondering, Ren Wufeng cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother Ren, I wish you a safe journey. Bring senior sister Xia and the rest out of the ruins of Huan." Zhang Xiaohua nodded. "I'll be counting on junior brother Ren's auspicious words." Then, Ren Wufeng pointed at a collapsed door and said, "Senior brother, you can go in from here. I don't know what's inside." "All right." Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and bade them farewell. Zhang Xiaohua rode on the David's deer. Before they even got close to the ruins of Huan, Huan let out a low cry and did not dare to take another step forward. Zhang Xiaohua brought the David's deer with good intentions, hoping that Huan could also find some kind of opportunity inside, like Little Martin, to have more powerful magical powers. Seeing this, he could only smile bitterly. He turned around and threw Huan aside. He told Ren Wufeng and the rest that they did not need to pay attention to it. When he came out, he would naturally find it. With the great wisdom sword in his hand, Zhang Xiaohua approached the collapsed door again. With his divine sense, he knew that the door was surrounded by arrays, and there was only a gap in the door. He didn't know if it was because the array had been there for a long time, or if this was the entrance to the array. Zhang Xiaohua sent his divine sense into the door and didn't see anything unusual. He extended his sword and walked in. Inside the door, there were also broken walls, and it looked no different from the outside. Zhang Xiaohua leaped onto a section of the wall and looked around. All he could see was ruins, and he couldn't see anything unusual. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and headed towards the center of the ruins of Huan. He executed the ethereal steps and flew towards the center of the ruins of Huan. After walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua felt that the disciples behind him couldn't see him anymore. He flew up and prepared to use his imperial wind technique to fly inside. Just as he was floating in the air, before he could use his imperial wind technique, he felt a huge force tugging at his body from the ground. It was as if he couldn't resist and was pulled to the ground. Pa! He landed on the ground. Zhang Xiaohua quickly released his divine sense and looked around. He didn't see anything unusual. However, when he executed the imperial wind technique again, he couldn't fly. When he executed the earth escape technique again, the ground under his feet was as hard as iron and he couldn't burrow through it. The earth escape technique is actually prohibited in the ruins of Huan. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. He originally wanted to execute the Imperial Wind technique to enter the center of the lightning and see if there was anything unusual. He wanted to see if he could take advantage of it before he went to look for Xiaqing and the rest. Since the array restricted his Earth escape technique, he could only execute the ethereal steps and slowly walk in. If he could just use the ethereal steps, it wouldn't be a troublesome task. However, when Zhang Xiaohua walked for a few hundred feet, he jumped down from a collapsed palace and flew towards another pillar. Suddenly, a flash of light flashed by and slashed towards Zhang Xiaohua's forehead. Shit, someone is sneak attacking me. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, the flash of light appeared in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua didn't have time to raise his sword, and his left hand was in front of his chest. Without thinking, he used his arm to block the flash of light. Chi. His brand new robe was cut open, and the flash of light was blocked by venerable fire dragon's robe. After that, the flash of light disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense saw clearly that it was a streak of heaven-earth essence Qi. It was like a long sword, and it disappeared in a flash. My God, what's going on? Since when did my character become so bad? Zhang Xiaohua sighed inwardly. However, he immediately understood that since the Huan Su was an array, there would definitely be an attack. Xiaqing and the rest had entered the array with Nun Jingyi's guidance and wouldn't be attacked by the array. Nun Jingyi only asked him to help Xiaqing and didn't ask him to enter the array. Of course, there was no need for her to tell him the way to enter the array. Wasn't he just looking for trouble by barging in? However, when he thought about the lightning in the middle of the Huan Su and the feeling that the item gave him, Zhang Xiaohua squinted his eyes and released his divine sense. He carefully walked in from another direction. After walking for a few feet, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly stopped. The great wisdom sword in his right hand blocked in front of him. It was precisely a flash of light that attacked him. Pa! A crisp sound rang out. It was really the sound of two swords clashing. The flash of light was immediately shattered. Immediately after, before Zhang Xiaohua had the time to relax, a few more flashes of light came at him in a disorderly manner. Zhang Xiaohua raised his sword as if he was fighting with someone. He used all kinds of techniques and struck down the flashes of light one by one. Haha. After striking down the flashes of light, Zhang Xiaohua's surroundings were actually slightly denser with heaven-earth essence Qi. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He executed the Worry-Free Heart Sutra and absorbed the heaven-earth essence Qi into his body. However, just as he refined the heaven-earth essence Qi, before he could rejoice, he suddenly heard a few howls. He looked to the side and saw a few saber-toothed tigers running towards him. They seemed to have smelled something. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly spread out his body and walked a few feet forward. He carefully hid his body under a roof. Just as he hid, the saber-toothed tigers arrived. They stopped at the place where Zhang Xiaohua had struck the flashes of light. The saber-toothed tigers were happily circling around there. They opened their mouths and seemed to be breathing with all their might. Io! Zhang Xiaohua subconsciously slapped his forehead. Those saber-toothed tigers obviously didn't smell his scent. They clearly smelled the dense heaven-earth essence Qi just now. Sure enough, when the saber-toothed tiger finished absorbing the Yuan Qi, it turned left and right and was about to leave. At this moment, one of the saber-toothed tigers suddenly turned its head and sniffed the ground. It raised its head and looked in the direction where Zhang Xiaohua was hiding. It happened to meet Zhang Xiaohua's gaze. Woo! The saber-toothed tiger let out a cry and pounced towards Zhang Xiaohua. Sigh. Needless to say, it had already discovered Zhang Xiaohua's whereabouts. Seeing that the saber-toothed tigers were about to catch up to them, Zhang Xiaohua jumped down. She held her heavy sword and stared coldly at the excited saber-toothed tigers. Calm. -4. Chapter 901. The saber-toothed tigers seemed to be human-like. When they saw Zhang Xiaohua standing with her sword, they were startled at first. Then, a few saber-toothed tigers separated and walked to Zhang Xiaohua's two sides, surrounding Zhang Xiaohua in the middle. Then, the saber-toothed tiger that faced Zhang Xiaohua pounced on her. When it was in front of her, it swung its head and its sword-like fangs immediately slashed towards Zhang Xiaohua's neck. My God! this saber-toothed tiger actually knows moves. As Zhang Xiaohua thought, the heavy sword in her hand met the saber-toothed tiger's attack. Dang! The two weapons collided. The saber-toothed tiger's eyes were filled with shock and pain. Its body borrowed the rebounding force from the heavy sword to turn its body. With a whoosh sound, its tail swept over. Zhang Xiaohua had seen the saber-toothed tiger's moves in the Yulon Grand Canyon. She knew that this tail sweep was extremely powerful. Since she couldn't withdraw her heavy sword in time, she could only curl up her body and flip in the air to dodge the tail. However, the saber-toothed tiger's tail was extremely nimble. When it saw Zhang Xiaohua dodge, the tail swept over Zhang Xiaohua's head and immediately slashed down diagonally. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua had already recovered her strength. She raised her heavy sword and used all her strength to meet the tail head-on. Dang! A loud sound was heard as the two iron rods collided. Zhang Xiaohua's hand was numb and even the heavy sword sank down. Oh my god! Zhang Xiaohua was somewhat flabbergasted. How did this saber-toothed tiger grow? Its tail is actually like an iron rod and its strength is not small. Even the experts in the pugilistic world are inferior to it. Zhang Xiaohua was horrified, but the saber-toothed tiger was even more horrified. They lived in the ruins of Huanshu. Their heads were tough, their claws were sharp, and their tails were strong. Even thick pillars could be easily chopped off. However, they had never suffered such a big loss. The saber-toothed tiger's tail was swung up by Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword. It almost lost its balance and fell to the ground. When the saber-toothed tiger stabilized its body, it became even angrier. It squatted back and opened its mouth to spit out a small golden sword that was smaller than a palm at Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was even more stunned. Could this saber-toothed tiger be like the Yulon Grand Canyon's Blood Wolf King and could spit things out from its mouth? That small golden sword arrived in front of Zhang Xiaohua's chest in a flash. In a hurry, Zhang Xiaohua raised her heavy sword and blocked in front of her. With a ding sound, the small golden sword was smashed into pieces and turned into wisps of heaven and earth's qi. Zhang Xiaohua was also forced to take a step back. Looking at her heavy sword, it was not injured at all. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's face again, there was no expression of surprise. Seeing that the small golden sword was smashed into pieces and dissipated in the air, Zhang Xiaohua felt that something was wrong. This was no different from the Blood Wolf King's wind blades. It was the result of the spiritual beast's manipulation of heaven and earth's qi. This saber-toothed tiger was obviously more powerful than the Blood Wolf King. Zhang Xiaohua had already encountered this battle situation before. Moreover, although the qi of heaven and earth in Huan Su was denser than outside, it was not enough to support the unlimited usage of the saber-toothed tiger. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua was not nervous. It was just that the Blood Wolf King had also released a lot of wind blades last time. Presumably, this saber-toothed tiger would be able to release more. Zhang Xiaohua's dragon binding ring to deal with the Blood Wolf King was not very useful at this time. After all, there were several saber-toothed tigers by the side, eyeing covetously. Trapping one was useless. She still had to find a way to subdue the saber-toothed tiger. Just as she was thinking, the saber-toothed tiger's small golden sword shot out one after another. The speed was faster than the previous, and the strength was also stronger than the previous. Zhang Xiaohua did not have any good ideas. She could only block and dodge at the same time. Luckily, the other saber-toothed tigers had good individual fighting qualities. They stepped forward and attacked together. With a whoosh sound, a small sword that was bigger than usual flew over. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to use her heavy sword to block, the small sword bent and dodged under the heavy sword. It was actually the same as the flying sword that Zhang Xiaohua used. Zhang Xiaohua did not have time to swing her sword and immediately dodged to the side. Her left hand hurriedly took out Chasing Dream, wanting to use Chasing Dream to deflect the golden sword. At this moment, a huge shadow pounced over. It was the saber-toothed tiger that took advantage of Zhang Xiaohua's carelessness to open its mouth and attack with its sharp teeth. Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She thought of an illusion and did not hesitate. She used the ethereal steps and lowered her body. Like a wisp of smoke, she scuttled past the saber-toothed tiger's body. and the chasing dream in her hand, did not forget to raise it high above her head. Sure enough, it was effective. When Zhang Xiaohua scuttled past the saber-toothed tiger, the golden sword that was chasing after her also closed in. However, just as it reached Zhang Xiaohua's face, it turned into Yuan Qi and disappeared in the air. Looking at the saber-toothed tiger again, it was crawling on the ground with blood flowing out. Even its intestines were flowing out. After twitching a few times, it did not know that Zhang Xiaohua had cut open its stomach. What is this? Zhang Xiaohua sighed inwardly at the saber-toothed tiger's ignorance of the illusion. She stared at the saber-toothed tiger cautiously, guarding against any changes. In the saber-toothed tiger's blood, she found a golden bead that was smaller than a green bean. This bead was so small that if not for the fact that Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to observe it, and that this golden bead emitted a strong Yuan Qi fluctuation, Zhang Xiaohua would not have noticed it. Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to make a move, the saber-toothed tigers beside her roared angrily. They opened their mouths and shot out all kinds of small golden swords. These small swords were different in color and size, but they were all powerful and fast. Zhang Xiaohua laughed heartily. She abandoned the great wisdom sword and held Chasing Dream in her hand. She then focused on drilling into the saber-toothed tiger's stomach. The saber-toothed tiger's stomach was indeed its weak point. Zhang Xiaohua tried the saber-toothed tiger's back, but the small sword could not pierce it at all. However, the pure white fur on the stomach could be easily pierced by Chasing Dream. Not long after, the remaining saber-toothed tigers were dealt with by Zhang Xiaohua. Without exception, they all crawled on the ground and died with their stomachs cut open. Holding the golden beads in her hand, Zhang Xiaohua carefully examined them. These beads were extremely round and contained an astonishing amount of Yuan Qi. Zhang Xiaohua tried to absorb the Yuan Qi from the Yuan stones, but she could not absorb a single trace. What is this? Why is it so strange? Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be puzzled. She pinched the hard beads in her hand. The golden light gave off an extremely sharp feeling. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She extended her hand and kept the few small beads into a jade box. She then took out the Blood Wolf King's corpse from her waist and did the same thing. She cut open the Blood Wolf King's abdomen. Sure enough, she found a small white bead in the Blood Wolf King's abdomen. It was actually smaller than a green bean. That white bead was the same as the golden bead. It contained an extremely strong Yuan Qi of the world. However, this milky white brilliance gave off an unfathomable feeling. Looking at the two different beads, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. After thinking for a long time, she suddenly slapped her forehead. The brilliance of this bead was extremely similar to the pale white bead that Huang Feng spat out from its mouth. However, Huang Feng's bead was much bigger than this one. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua was even more puzzled. Why did these beasts have such a plaything in their abdomen? What was it used for? Following that, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. That day in the secret room in the Yulong Grand Canyon, she saw the disemboweled black lightning. Wasn't it the same as these saber-toothed tigers? Could it be that the elder of lingering fragrance, Peak, killed black lightning just to snatch this bead? Zhang Xiaohua nodded in her heart. That's right. Huang Feng split one of his beads into two and gave it to Little Martin and Little Dog. The two of them were saved. Since the Blood Wolf King and the saber-toothed tiger had this small bead, they were able to spit out wind blades and golden swords from their mouths. This bead must have a great use. It's just that she didn't know about it. I've picked up a treasure. Zhang Xiaohua laughed. She kept the corpses of the saber-toothed tigers and the Blood Wolf King into her belt. Who knew if there were any secrets on their bodies that she didn't know about? After packing up, Zhang Xiaohua looked up and saw that the black vortex was still far away. She was still in a pile of ruins. She didn't know if it was the place she came in from. Anyway, she didn't know the route. She still had to walk towards the center of the Huansu. Wasn't there a path everywhere? Zhang Xiaohua confirmed the direction and used the ethereal steps to move forward. After walking for a while, she still didn't see any saber-toothed tigers. This made Zhang Xiaohua very depressed. Could it be that the heavens are benevolent, asking me to kill less? I just want to accumulate some fun beads. If they don't provoke me, I won't provoke them either. Zhang Xiaohua was sure that if the saber-toothed tigers didn't provoke him, he wouldn't kill them. This was in line with his vow to not kill innocent people. However, the saber-toothed tigers didn't know how powerful he was and his vow. This was a little too sanctimonious. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was regretfully walking forward, he arrived at a rather large empty area. It was a 3 feet wide area, and there wasn't anything. Zhang Xiaohua didn't think too much and entered it. However, when he entered, he realized that something was wrong. The scene in front of him changed, and it was a vast area. Oh no, I'm so careless. I actually barged into an illusion array. Zhang Xiaohua was very regretful. Of course, there were so many places around. He could have gone around casually. Who would be like him and barge in like a headless fly? Just as he was trying to figure out a way to break out of the formation, a group of lights rose up from the horizon not far away. Zhang Xiaohua didn't care if he didn't look, but when he saw the rapidly approaching lights, he couldn't help but be dumbfounded. Yes, he had never been so surprised. -4. Chapter 902. In the illusion, countless rays of light rose from the horizon not far away, like a group of meteors flying over, causing Zhang Xiaohua to be dumbstruck. He had never been so happy before. Those rays of light were none other than flying swords. That's right, the meteor-like flying swords were flying towards Zhang Xiaohua from not far away. This scene was normal, but in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes, it was different. Zhang Xiaohua had learned the flying sword and obtained a few nameless sword moves from Elder Yu. He used his spiritual consciousness to drive Chasing Dream, and he was able to use it well. However, it was a pity that Chasing Dream was caught by a martial arts expert in the underground hall of the Nameless Mountain Villa. After that, Zhang Xiaohua obtained the dream-weaving sword technique, and the moves of the flying sword were even more abundant. Gradually, he was able to attack his opponent from different angles. However, this was still far from enough. In front of Shimujuan, the first disciple of the Ruijin Palace, his flying sword was actually broken by him, and he could not even get close to him. This did not seem to match the reputation of the flying sword of the immortal Tao. Even Zhang Xiaohua was secretly puzzled. After thinking about it countless times, he could only attribute it to his shallow knowledge and did not obtain the essence of the flying sword. However, when he saw the flying swords that filled the sky today, he finally understood that he was wrong from the beginning. Moreover, he was completely wrong. The flying sword of the immortal Tao was never like the flying sword of the martial Tao, where each move was used to fight the enemy. Although he used his divine sense to drive the flying sword, the moves that he learned were derived from the moves of the flying sword by others and turned into moves of the martial Tao. Although he changed back, the essence of the moves was still the same. When he drove the flying sword, he only increased the speed of his Qing Gong to infinitely increase, allowing him to launch different moves from different angles. In essence, this was still the way of the martial Tao and was very different from the flying sword of the immortal Tao. Looking at the flying swords in the sky again, every single one of them was exactly the same. Moreover, every single one of them was a sword technique. All of the flying swords had actually used all the moves of a set of sword techniques. In an instant, they had firmly trapped Zhang Xiaohua in one place, leaving no room for him to dodge. This was the true meaning of the immortal Tao flying sword. If Zhang Xiaohua sent these 10,000 Jumings flying toward Shimujuan, how could that fellow dodge? He was afraid that his soul would scatter in a single exchange. However, it looked easy. If Zhang Xiaohua were to perform it, where would she start? How could he turn one Juming into 10,000 Juming? Just as Zhang Xiaohua was lost in her thoughts, the tens of thousands of flying swords approached. Even if Zhang Xiaohua wanted to hide, there was nowhere for her to hide. Zhang Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. She immediately recovered from her shock and quickly swept her divine sense to the side. Where could she possibly hide? Death at dawn. These words inadvertently flashed across Zhang Xiaohua's mind. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua had also calmed down. Her gaze was somewhat deep as she stared at the flying swords that were as bright as the stars. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She frowned slightly. Just a moment ago, She had only taken a glance and felt that these tens of thousands of flying swords did not seem to be any different. However, now that she was on the brink of death, after calming herself down, she realized that the sword shadow in one of the flying swords was actually somewhat blurry. It was completely different from the brightness and clarity of the other flying swords. Could it be that this is the flaw? But how could there be a flaw here? Zhang Xiaohua did not have time to think about it. She immediately swung her heavy sword and drew a large circle in front of her chest. Then, she threw it towards the blurry area. Kacha clang. A few crisp sounds rang out. A gap the size of a person was actually created among the sword shadows. It was just enough for Zhang Xiaohua to squeeze through. With a schwa sound, the sword shot past Zhang Xiaohua and landed on the ground beneath her feet. Following that, another wave of brilliance rose from the distance. Just like before, they flew towards Zhang Xiaohua. However, in this wave of swords, there was a gap in the swords that Zhang Xiaohua had knocked down. Zhang Xiaohua's fear was greatly dissipated. She only needed to aim at the gap and jump into it. How could there be any danger? However, Zhang Xiaohua used his finger to scratch his chin and had an idea. He extended his hand and took out the crimson spirit shield from his bosom. He formed a seal and a breath of clear air sprayed onto the crimson spirit shield. The crimson spirit shield immediately emitted a brilliance and gradually rose above Zhang Xiaohua's head. It protected Zhang Xiaohua's entire body tightly. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to see if this meteor-like flying sword was as sharp as he imagined it to be. Sure enough, when the flying sword hit the crimson spirit shield's defense like a moth to a flame, it did not take long before the brilliance dimmed. Wonderful! Zhang Xiaohua did not test it anymore. She jumped out from the gap and formed a seal to withdraw the crimson spirit shield. After testing the prowess of the swords, Zhang Xiaohua began to ponder on how to break this illusion array. Needless to say, these swords could only exist in an illusory array. Those blurry sword shadows were probably due to the fact that the illusory array was too old, and the heaven and earth yuan qi was insufficient, resulting in such a huge flaw. Otherwise, how could Zhang Xiaohua's few sword flashes shatter all the sword shadows in that area? As for this illusion array, if Zhang Xiaohua's guess was right, it should be an empty space of a few feet. However, she did not know if this illusion array could expand the size of the empty space. Zhang Xiaohua thought about it and executed the ethereal steps. She picked a direction and ran forward. That net of swords also followed. No matter where Zhang Xiaohua ran to, waves of swords would shoot over. Cough cough, of course. The swords were just decorations now. Zhang Xiaohua did not have the mood to provoke them. Even if she could not provoke them, she could still avoid them. Every time she jumped, it would be fine as long as she jumped accurately. As expected, after a few waves of swords, when Zhang Xiaohua felt that she was about to reach the end of the empty space, the swords no longer rose from the distance. That was close. Zhang Xiaohua wiped the sweat on her forehead and smiled. If this illusion array could change its size, I would not be able to escape even if I were to die of exhaustion. Zhang Xiaohua took a few steps out of the illusory array and came to the tall pillar that appeared in the ruins. Looking back at the ordinary empty space, Zhang Xiaohua had a lingering fear. He wanted to break the illusory array and see how it turned the flying swords into a group of swords. However, he had never seen this array before and had no way of breaking it. Even if there was a flying sword hidden under the empty space, he could not burrow into the ground now. So how could he get it? Hence, Zhang Xiaohua raised the heavy sword and advanced cautiously. This time, Zhang Xiaohua learned her lesson. Whenever she saw an empty space, she would avoid it. She did not move in a straight line and made a detour. However, it was not all for naught. During this period, she met a few saber-toothed tigers. Under their attacks, Zhang Xiaohua did not show any weakness and kept a few golden pearls. The Huan ruins covered a huge area. Zhang Xiaohua ran for a long time until the sun set. Only then did she reach a huge abandoned palace. Of course, this palace was the same as the one Zhang Xiaohua saw previously. It had long collapsed and only a few golden and dazzling fragments of stone and broken walls showed its former glory. This is... Zhang Xiaohua scanned the place with her divine sense and found a plaque with faint energy under a pile of rubble. Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment and walked over. She took out the great wisdom sword and cleared the rubble around the plaque. She even removed the huge rock that was pressing down on the plaque, revealing a plaque that was taller than Zhang Xiaohua. On the plaque, there were 3 large words, Ruijin Hall. If Zhang Xiaohua was not proficient in the Shua Wenjiezi, she might not be able to recognize it. Ruijin Hall? When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she was stunned. She pinched her chin and pondered. This name was actually the same as the Ruijin Hall on Lingering Fragrance Peak. Could there be a connection between the two? Could it be that this ruin was where the Imosua Palace used to be? What happened later on that caused it to be moved to Lingering Fragrance Peak? But what was the reason for this? To be able to destroy such a large area of the palace, it was almost the same as pushing down the entire Lingering Fragrance Peak. Forbidden ground, forbidden ground. There are indeed endless secrets inside. Zhang Xiaohua retracted her gaze from the plaque of Ruijin Hall and looked at the large damaged palace behind her. Based on her previous experience, this palace shouldn't have any restrictions. Forget it. I should find that thing as soon as possible or replenish the energy of heaven and earth required by the delusion breaker magic eye. Wouldn't it be better for me to recover my cultivation as soon as possible? When she thought of this, Zhang Xiaohua floated and took a detour to the side. However, things didn't go well. Just as she took a detour around the palace, she encountered 2 saber-toothed tigers that were several times larger than the ones she saw previously. Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua had already learned the essence of Tiger Slayer. After a few tricks, she still managed to sneak attack the 2 saber-toothed tigers from below. She killed the 2 saber-toothed tigers and obtained the bead that was 1 size larger than the golden bead. Just as Zhang Xiaohua kept the bead and the saber-toothed tigers, she suddenly thought of something. Yellow Wind was like the wind and flew at a fast speed. The small bead in its stomach was pale white. The Blood Wolf King could spit out wind blades from its mouth, and the small bead in its stomach was also pale white. As for the saber-toothed tiger, it could actually spit out small golden swords, and the small bead in its stomach was actually golden. Could it be related to the 5 elements? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua turned back to look at the place she came from. The illusory array she encountered just now was mainly made of flying swords. There were no other attacks, and the saber-toothed tiger's body was as hard as iron. What did this mean? Didn't Ren Wufeng, who was outside the Huan ruins, say that the Huan ruins was a huge array formation? Then, what was this array formation? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua felt a burst of excitement. She looked at the Ruijin Palace next to her and suppressed the urge to go in. First, she used her divine sense to check the heaven and earth yuan qi in the air. Then, she quickly rushed forward. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the front of the Ruijin Palace with a surprised look on her face. -4. Chapter 903. Zhang Xiaohua came back from the front with a pleasantly surprised look on his face. He walked further ahead and used his divine consciousness to check the thin qi of heaven and earth in the air. The density of the qi of heaven and earth in front of him was similar to the surroundings of the Ruijin Hall, but his divine consciousness felt different. The qi of heaven and earth in the vicinity of the Ruijin Hall had a sharp and prickly feeling, but further ahead, it was filled with warmth and vitality. Even the scene of the ruins was different. From the entrance of the Huan Su to the Ruijin Hall, there were rocks, broken walls, broken pillars, and other objects that were incomparably hard. There wasn't even a blade of grass. Further ahead, weeds, small trees, and wisteria gradually appeared. It was exactly what Zhang Xiaohua had guessed. The qi of heaven and earth in the vicinity of the Ruijin Hall should have the majority of the qi of heaven and earth in the vicinity of the Ruijin Hall. Further ahead, the qi of heaven and earth in the vicinity of the Ruijin Hall should have the majority of the qi of heaven and earth in the vicinity of the Ruijin Hall. Weren't these the qi of heaven and earth in the 5 elements? Zhang Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised because he had imparted the 5 elements Dian formation to Nie Qinyu in the past. That formation was related to the qi of heaven and earth in the 5 elements Dian formation of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Zhang Xiaohua had only roughly grasped the formation, but he had never seen the qi of heaven and earth in it, let alone setting up the formation. Even the five elements Dian formation that he had imparted to Nie Qinyu from the Rejuvenation Valley was simply changing the qi of heaven and earth in the five elements Dian formation to five people or five other things. This kind of five elements Dian formation could only be said to be similar in form but not in spirit. It could only realize some superficial changes in the formation, but the true essence of the formation or the killing move was impossible to realize. As for the theory of the five elements, Zhang Xiaohua had boldly deduced it from the medicinal herbs. However, Zhang Xiaohua had never seen the true qi of heaven and earth. Today, when he saw the difference in the qi of heaven and earth, Zhang Xiaohua had already sensed that the formation of the Huan Su was related to the qi of heaven and earth. Even if it wasn't the five elements Dian formation, the method to break it would be effective. With a ready-made immortal Tao array in front of her, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel her hands itch. According to the array formation of the five elements Dian formation, the five elements vital qi was divided into 5 regions. Every region had a so-called array core, which was suppressed by a single attribute Dharma treasure. The 5 regions of the 5 elements Dian formation could be arranged according to the thoughts of the person who set up the formation. Every region had endless dangers, and there was a rather strong connection between the regions. Zhang Xiaohua had just accidentally walked forward. Presumably, the 5 elements formation of the ruins of Huan should also be moving inwards layer by layer. Looking at the Rui Jin Palace that had collapsed for God knows how many years, Zhang Xiaohua had already understood that this Rui Jin Palace might be the eye of the metal attribute area of the 5 elements formation. In other words, there must be a metal attribute magic weapon in this Rui Jin Palace. If Zhang Xiaohua wanted to break this 5 elements formation, she must first find the metal attribute magic weapon in this Rui Jin Palace. However, since it was the eye of the formation, it must be filled with danger and murderous intent. Is there a need to go in? Although Zhang Xiaohua was very impulsive and had the tendency to be blinded by greed, she still held her chin with her hand and hesitated. Forget it? How can one catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? Zhang Xiaohua steeled her heart and took out the crimson spirit shield. She formed a seal, and the shield flew to Zhang Xiaohua's head. It spewed out a red brilliance and protected Zhang Xiaohua. Immediately after, Zhang Xiaohua took out a jade talisman and crushed it. Another green light shield rose and covered Zhang Xiaohua. After doing all this, Zhang Xiaohua's heart finally calmed down. Holding the Great Wisdom Greatsword in his hand, he leaped up and jumped onto the signboard, walking straight in. The ruins in the Sharp Gold Palace were not much different from the ruins outside. It was just that there were more broken walls. At a glance, one could see that there were many rooms in the palace. There were also many curtains, silk, and other things in the ruins of the Sharp Gold Palace. Some of them had decayed, but some still had a luster. Zhang Xiaohua walked in cautiously. After an incense stick's time, she did not see anything strange. She also did not see any traps or formations. At this moment, the sky had already darkened. Because the sky above the Huan Su was covered with dark clouds, it became dark earlier. Only the occasional flash of lightning in the distance added a lot of strangeness to the sky. Whoosh! A bolt of lightning flashed. Although it was extremely far away, it still illuminated the entire Rui Jin Palace. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua was shocked because he saw a figure standing beside a short pillar not far away. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and immediately hid behind a pillar. She cautiously called out, "Is that senior sister Imo Shuigong in front?" After a long while, there was still no response. There was only the faint sound of thunder in the distance. Zhang Xiaohua secretly poked her head out. When she took a closer look, she realized that the figure was actually motionless. Zhang Xiaohua waited for a while, but the figure still did not move. Could it be a dead person? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and felt that it was very possible. She did not keep the crimson spirit shield and continued to walk towards the figure. As she got closer, Zhang Xiaohua understood that it was a person dressed in palace attire. The style of the palace attire seemed a little old. "Senior sister, are you alive or dead?" Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. Cough, cough. The woman naturally could not answer. Zhang Xiaohua came closer and scanned with his divine sense. The woman was dead. Zhang Xiaohua was relieved. Just when she wanted to take a closer look at how the woman died, she suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. Zhang Xiaohua did not have time to think. She exerted force on her feet and wanted to dodge to the side. However, before he could pull himself up, a ray of black light suddenly appeared and pierced right into his chest. With a peub sound, the black light was blocked by the brilliance of the crimson spirit protection, and its strength was greatly reduced. However, the black light seemed to be incomparably sharp, and it was also very agile. It was like a small snake, and after a few struggles, it broke through the defense of the crimson spirit protection and directly plunged into it. There's no mistake. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. Her body was still in midair when she stretched out her hand to grab the black light. The martial art broke through the crimson spirit shield but was blocked by the defense of the jade talisman. After a few struggles, it finally stopped moving. However, when Zhang Xiaohua's hand reached out to grab it, the black light shattered into pieces and disappeared without a trace. This, heaven and earth yuan qi can be used like this? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned by the method of the immortal Tao. Although the black light was formed by the metal attribute yuan qi, its sharpness was not inferior to a divine weapon. Moreover, it had a spirituality that weapons did not have. This was almost beyond Zhang Xiaohua's understanding. It was no wonder that Zhang Xiaohua was so shocked. Born in the immortal Tao era, where the yuan qi of heaven and earth was scarce, how could she know the methods of the immortal Tao? This transformation of yuan qi into black light was just an extremely simple method to mimic the shape of an object. Moreover, it was just the power of some magical tools. Zhang Xiaohua leapt onto the short pillar at the side. After waiting for a long time and seeing that there was no more black light, she jumped back down. There was no need to look carefully. In the chest of the palace-dressed woman, there was a bowl-sized hole. Sigh, Zhang Xiaohua sighed. This black light came too suddenly and was extremely sharp. Even if she released her divine sense, she could not completely escape. If not for the crimson spirit shield, with just the defense of the jade talisman, she would have been seriously injured even if she did not die. Even if this palace-dressed woman's martial arts were strong, or perhaps she was a famous disciple of Imo Xiangong, it was inevitable that she would fall here. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua cupped her hands and said, I don't know which generation this senior sister is from. Meeting. It's fate. I can't do anything, so I can only let you rest in peace. The floor of the Rue Jin Palace Hall was paved with jade, which was as hard as gold. Zhang Xiaohua went to the loose soil outside the hall. Although it was also hard, she could always dig a hole. However, when she placed the woman's body into the hole, a cyan jade slip fell out from the woman's wound. Zhang Xiaohua casually took it and simply looked at it with her divine sense before stuffing it into her bosom. After burying the woman, Zhang Xiaohua bowed and said, Thank you, senior sister, for the jade slip. Although I don't know what is inside, I am still grateful. In addition, I hope that senior sister's spirit in heaven will bless me so that I can avenge you and find the artifact of the Rue Jin Palace Hall. After that, Zhang Xiaohua continued to move forward. This Rue Jin Palace Hall was really big. In the dark night, the flashing of lightning made Zhang Xiaohua feel a little dizzy. Along the way, she was attacked by similar black light from time to time. However, under the protection of the Crimson Spirit Shield and the defense of the Jade Talisman, she was not injured at all. Although she didn't know the time in the dark night, Zhang Xiaohua could feel that it was almost midnight. She prepared to find a place to rest in the palace hall. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's sight was empty. She had actually arrived at a rather large open space. This open space was different from the open space in the illusion array. It seemed to be the garden in the middle of the palace hall. There were a few rare rockery piled up in the middle, and in this rockery, the heaven and earth origin energy seemed to be much denser. Great! Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to clap her hands. After searching for a long time, this should be the core of the metal origin energy array. However, what kind of dangerous trap could there be here? Zhang Xiaohua held the great wisdom sword in his hand and released Chasing Dream. He even crushed a defensive jade talisman. Only then did he expand his body and rush to the top of the fake mountain like a wisp of smoke. Unfortunately, even when he steadied himself on the fake mountain, he did not see anything strange happen. Could it be that this is the legendary, the most dangerous place is the safest place? Zhang Xiaohua thought to herself. She looked around again. Around the rockery, there was a faint pressure of origin energy leaking out. No matter how she looked at it, this wasn't a good place. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua had a realization. The core of this array must be an extremely powerful array, and this array required a lot of heaven and earth origin energy. Now that the heaven and earth origin energy was thin, even the incense cult couldn't be that strong. This powerful array, could it last? After waiting for a while, there was no movement. Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to scan the area and went straight to the middle of the rockery. In the middle of the rockery, there was a small dried-up pool. In the middle of the pool, there was a large circular groove. Between the grooves, there was a cover. Vaguely, there was a strong golden light that shot out from within. There must be a metal-type magical artifact inside. Needless to say, Zhang Xiaohua immediately figured it out. He leaped forward, and just as he approached the circular groove, golden light beams rose from the surroundings of the small pool. They gathered in the air and transformed into the shape of a huge blade, slashing downwards. -4. Chapter 904. In a moment of carelessness, Zhang Xiaohua thought that since there were no traps on the fake mountain, everything would be fine. When he saw that huge golden blade fall, he was immediately shocked. That huge golden blade was like a mountain, directly chopping down. Moreover, he had a feeling of being locked on by divine sense. It seemed that no matter how he twisted and turned, that golden blade would definitely chop down on his forehead. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua's head was dripping with sweat. He clearly knew that this huge golden blade was definitely formed from metal attribute energy. However, he also clearly knew that as long as this golden blade fell on his body, he would definitely be split into two pieces. It was no different from a real huge blade. Immortal Tao, actually had such endless methods. Zhang Xiaohua was once again convinced. However, at this moment, he didn't have time to carefully ponder whether this golden blade was stronger or the 10,000 flying swords. That golden blade was already on his head. His mind quickly turned. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly raised the great wisdom sword with both hands. He saw that huge golden blade was getting closer and closer. Just based on its power, it firmly suppressed Zhang Xiaohua. However, when it really came close, Zhang Xiaohua also clearly saw that the edges of that golden blade were already somewhat blurred. With a loud clang, the great wisdom sword blocked the golden blade, and the huge power of the golden blade instantly smashed Zhang Xiaohua's feet to the ground. Luckily, Zhang Xiaohua's arms were now inexhaustible. Moreover, his bones had always been tempered, so he wasn't smashed into meat paste. However, even like this, Zhang Xiaohua's arms were still sore and numb. He had never encountered such a situation. With a wah sound, the huge golden blade that was blocked by the great wisdom sword immediately turned into specks of golden light and disappeared. Immediately after, in the sky, that huge golden blade condensed again. This won't do. Zhang Xiaohua jumped up from the ground and became anxious. Zhang Xiaohua had already thought through all the instruments in his arms. There was no need to mention the Crimson Spirit Protection and the defensive Jade Talisman. He almost couldn't block that black light just now. This golden blade's aura was monstrous and would definitely be defeated in one blow. As for the small sword that he was using previously, he shouldn't take it out and embarrass himself. The great wisdom sword seemed to have a natural restraint against the energy of heaven and earth. Once he blocked the golden blade, with just strength, he would be exhausted sooner or later. In the end, the remaining energy would definitely come down and split his intestines open. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua realized that the junk that he had picked up for half of his life was really junk. At the crucial moment, none of them were useful. Fortunately, the dead Shimujuan had given him the purple phoenix hairpin. This was the treasure of the fragrant cult. However, Before Zhang Xiaohua knew how to use the purple phoenix hairpin, Zhang Xiaohua had inadvertently. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized something. Of course, didn't she have a small mirror that she didn't know how to use but could still be used? This was also something that he had picked up, but when he was resisting Shimujuan, it was actually able to reflect the electric light of the purple phoenix hairpin and kill Shimujuan in one blow. This must be the best piece of junk that he had picked up. Zhang Xiaohua didn't have time to think further. The golden knife was already above her head. Zhang Xiaohua raised the small mirror above her head and injected vital energy into it naturally. When Zhang Xiaohua injected vital energy into the small mirror, the mirror itself didn't have any reaction. It was exactly the same as when Zhang Xiaohua had tried it before. However, when the golden knife was about half a foot away from the small mirror, the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the golden knife had already started to be projected into the small mirror. As the yuan qi of heaven and earth increased, the small mirror gradually glowed and a layer of golden brilliance appeared. When the golden knife really hit the small mirror immediately emitted a dazzling brilliance with the small mirror as the center. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's hand sank as if there was a heavy weight pressing down on her arm. Even though Zhang Xiaohua's arms were incomparably strong, she was still able to press him down by an inch. A clear footprint was imprinted in the middle of the pond. As the brilliance on the small mirror spun, the huge golden knife was lifted above Zhang Xiaohua's head. However, the golden knife continued to press downwards as if it wouldn't stop until it had cut Zhang Xiaohua into two pieces. Zhang Xiaohua roared and injected all the vital energy in his body into the small mirror. After receiving vital energy, the small mirror spun even faster and emitted a faint woo-woo sound. Suddenly, the small mirror emitted a soft ji sound that sounded like the cry of a red-crowned crane. The golden brilliance also shot up into the sky and lifted the huge golden knife. Then, it reflected the huge golden knife. As if time had reversed, the huge golden knife disintegrated in midair and turned into rays of golden light that returned to the surroundings of the pond. Plop. Zhang Xiaohua fell on his butt in front of the groove. Right now, not only did he not have any vital energy, he didn't even have the strength to move his arms. However, this was still a dangerous place. Zhang Xiaohua only rested for a short while before he activated Chasing Dream and opened the groove's lid. Inside, there was a dazzling golden pearl that was the size of a duck's egg. Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand, and the pearl immediately flew over. However, just as the pearl flew out of the groove, the entire groove shook. Following that, the fake mountain and the ground also shook. This is bad. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly remembered that in order to break the 5 elements Dain formation, he had to break all 5 of the formation's cores simultaneously. If he only broke one, the other cores would change and the entire formation's mechanisms would be triggered. On the way in, he had already thought about it. He just happened to have 5 identical 8 trigrams purple gold furnaces in his belt. When he took out the artifact from the array core, he would immediately place one of the 8 trigrams purple gold furnaces in the array core to suppress the array core. When he was hit by the shocking attack of the golden knife, he forgot about this matter. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took out one of the 8 trigrams purple gold furnaces from his belt and threw it into the groove. The base of the huge furnace happened to press down on the groove, and the groove immediately stopped shaking. Zhang Xiaohua didn't stop and immediately used the ethereal steps to dash out of the fake mountain. While he was in midair, he placed the jade talisman in various places and set up a restriction. When he landed, he immediately closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. When he woke up the next day, the sky was still dark. Zhang Xiaohua looked around, and there wasn't any difference from yesterday. As for the fake mountain, the 8 trigrams purple gold furnace was blocked inside and he couldn't see it clearly. Hee. Zhang Xiaohua chuckled and took out the golden pearl from his money pouch. This pearl was the size of a duck's egg and it emitted a golden brilliance. However, when he looked at it, there wasn't any glaring feeling. Zhang Xiaohua scanned it with his divine sense and felt that the pearl contained a lot of heaven and earth yuan qi. It was similar to the metal attribute yuan qi in the sharp gold hall. Furthermore, there was an additional golden energy. What is this pearl? 5 elements pearl? It didn't seem to be mentioned in the jade slip. As Zhang Xiaohua thought about it, he couldn't help but circulate the Carefree Heart Sutra. He wanted to absorb the yuan qi and the pearl into his body. It was a pity that even if he used all his strength, he couldn't absorb a single strand of metal attribute yuan qi.
Strange.
Zhang Xiaohua sighed. There is obviously a lot of heaven and earth yuan qi in this thing. Why can't I absorb it? No wonder the lingering fragrance peak's Lord Sect leader didn't touch this treasure and let me take advantage of it. Sigh. Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts were simple. If it was only so, why would the lingering fragrance peak leave it here? If you took the golden pearl, the 5 elements great array would be broken and the Huan ruins would no longer have an array to protect it. Why would Nun Jingyi do such a thing? If Nun Jingyi knew that she had sent Zhang Xiaohua to the Huan ruins to lead a wolf into the house, wouldn't she have jumped off the suicide cliff a second time? Zhang Xiaohua looked at the golden pearl and liked it even more. The yuan qi in it seemed to be a golden liquid that could rotate. After a while, he took out a jade box and placed the golden pearl inside. He then used the most powerful technique he knew on it, afraid that it would reveal its aura. After packing up, Zhang Xiaohua didn't stay here any longer. He came out of the sharp gold hall and headed straight to the center of the Huan ruins. It was unknown if it was because Zhang Xiaohua had taken the golden pearl away. The outer area of the Huan ruins no longer had the support of yuan qi. Along the way, he didn't encounter any restrictions. As Zhang Xiaohua ventured deeper into the ruins, the scenery around him started to change. There was a touch of green, and some weeds and vines appeared in the ruins. There were even a few large trees growing on top of them. Zhang Xiaohua knew that this was probably because he had entered the wood element area. In his spiritual sense, the yuan qi was more lively and had more vitality. I wonder what kind of mechanism there is here. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be curious. Just as he was thinking, he slipped and stepped on a piece of moss. At this moment, a rumbling sound came from above. This sound was somewhat familiar. It was the sound of thunder in the distance. At first, Zhang Xiaohua didn't pay attention to it, but when he looked up, he was shocked. This wasn't thunder. In the sky, there were countless huge green logs. They were colliding with each other and rolling, making loud noises and smashing towards Zhang Xiaohua. This is the attack method of the wood element's qi? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. It was obvious that the strong were bullying the weak. Countless huge logs were smashing down. Who cares about your magical powers? Sigh. Zhang Xiaohua sighed again. He used the great wisdom sword to fight with others. Didn't he also have the same idea? This was karma. In a flash, Zhang Xiaohua still didn't have a better way to break the trap. Without any reason, he could only take out the small mirror and pour his qi into it. Then, he raised it up, however. After waiting for a long time, the huge log still didn't fall. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. When he looked up again, the huge green log was just rolling in the sky. When it was about 4 feet above his head, it suddenly disappeared. Looking at the aggressive huge log above, and then looking at the small mirror in his hand that didn't have the slightest reaction despite pouring his qi into it, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It looks fake. And here I was wondering how powerful this mechanism was. TSK, so it's just an illusion. However, Zhang Xiaohua immediately slapped her forehead. How was this an illusion? This was a disaster caused by the yuan qi of heaven and earth. She reckoned that this formation was extremely powerful and required a vast amount of wood-type yuan qi. The formation eye in the wood-type region could only provide enough yuan qi to drive this formation. It was already impossible for it to form a formation. This is another sign of my good character. Zhang Xiaohua pinched her chin, secretly pleased with herself. Zhang Xiaohua put away the small mirror and looked at the huge tree above her head. She took the great wisdom sword and walked around it. After another incense stick's worth of time, they suddenly heard a few high-pitched cries in front of them. -4. Chapter 905. This sound was very familiar. It sounded like the giant ape in the Yulon Grand Canyon. Could it be the Tongtian ape that Ren Wufeng mentioned? Zhang Xiaohua frowned. This was an area where the wood elemental energy gathered. If there were any ferocious beasts related to trees or grass, it would not be strange. Hearing the whistling sound, Zhang Xiaohua looked left and right. She curled up and hid on top of a broken pillar. Just as Zhang Xiaohua hid, the sound of the chirping sound was already near. Zhang Xiaohua raised her head slightly, revealing her eyes. She saw 4 or 5 giant apes that were twice the size of the giant ape leaping over from afar. These Tongtian apes were somewhat different from the giant ape. Not to mention the ferocious snow-white fangs in their bloody mouths. Not to mention their fist-sized eyes that were blood-red in color. Even their knee-length arms were strange. The shoulders of the Tongtian apes were incomparably thick. Their arms were also thick and long. When they raised their arms, it was as if they were connected together. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call them Tongtian apes. When the Tongtian apes leaped to a place, they were blocked by a thick pillar. The Tongtian ape did not dodge. Instead, it stretched out its arms and hugged the pillar. With a resounding cry, the huge pillar was lifted up. Then, it exerted force and opened a path to the side. As for the heaven-piercing ape, it had a long body and raised its head towards the sky. "E-ao-ao," it cried out. As it cried out, it beat its chest with its 2 arms. It appeared to be incomparably excited. Not waiting for the Tongtian ape to stop, the other Tongtian apes beside it also jumped up and rushed to the side. They shouted and threw away the broken stones that were blocking the path. Fortunately, half a piece of red wood with a wisp of curtains hit the pillar that Zhang Xiaohua was on. Zhang Xiaohua helplessly jumped up and was about to dodge to the side. When Zhang Xiaohua's figure just rose, she was seen by one of the Tongtian apes. The Tongtian ape's blood-red eyes immediately flashed with excitement. It seemed that it had not seen such an interesting toy for a long time. In its hand was a stone-like object. With a shake of its hand, it accurately threw it towards Zhang Xiaohua's head. Cough, cough. Looking at the accuracy, it was indeed practiced. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that her figure was exposed, she knew that it was not good. These Tongtian apes were familiar with the terrain and had extraordinary strength. She might not be a match for them. Hence, she immediately used the ethereal steps and ran along the side of the broken wall to escape. The Tongtian ape that discovered Zhang Xiaohua roared and jumped up from the ground. With a leap, it covered several feet and chased after her. This Tongtian ape's movement did not matter, but it also alarmed the others. One by one, they saw Zhang Xiaohua running away. "Iyo!" The few Tongtian apes howled and threw the things in their hands at Zhang Xiaohua. For a moment, Zhang Xiaohua was flustered and her speed slowed down. Seeing that the Tongtian apes were approaching, Zhang Xiaohua did not care about being discovered by Xiaqing and the others. She made a hand seal and wanted to fly away. However, after casting the hand seal, Zhang Xiaohua's figure did not float. Instead, because of the delay, the Tongtian apes were much closer. It can't be, even the flying technique is restricted? Zhang Xiaohua immediately understood that this place was the same as the entrance of the Yulon Grand Canyon. There was also a restriction. Hence, she did not dare to delay. She exerted force on her feet and turned to the side. Zhang Xiaohua's plan was very good. She wanted to use her Qinggong to escape the pursuit of the Tongtian apes and then look for the eye of the array. However, she did not expect that the Tongtian apes, in addition to their extraordinary strength, also had the advantage of being as fast as lightning. In addition, they were very familiar with the array. In less than half a cup of tea's time, they surrounded Zhang Xiaohua in a shabby place. Alas, Zhang Xiaohua sighed and stretched out the great wisdom sword. Previously, she had seen the 10,000 swords and that shocking blade. Zhang Xiaohua was no longer interested in taking out Chasing Dream. Thinking about the huge body of the Tongtian apes, Chasing Dream really might not be useful. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had stopped, the heaven-piercing apes stood up straight, raised their heads, and let out a series of a wool, a wool. Again, they beat their chests with their hands. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was happy. She leaped and thrust out great wisdom sword. Like lightning, it pierced the leg of the nearest Tongtian ape. Who would have thought that the other party was also cunning? Since the long sword could not get close to its body, it stopped shouting and clenched its huge fist. With a hoo sound, it smashed towards Zhang Xiaohua's long sword. Seeing the fist smashing towards her, Zhang Xiaohua did not dodge. She raised her long sword and met it head-on. She also wanted to test the strength of this Tongtian ape. With a pa sound, Zhang Xiaohua's long sword hit the Tongtian ape's fist. With a woo sound, the great wisdom sword was knocked back and blood flowed out of the Tongtian ape's fist. The Tongtian ape screamed in pain. It took 2 steps back and raised its arm to look at its wound. Zhang Xiaohua also took a step back and stood still. She had a preliminary understanding of the Tongtian ape's strength. Seeing the Tongtian ape in pain, Zhang Xiaohua had a slight smile on her face. However, that smile did not last long. She was shocked again. The wound on the Tongtian ape's fist was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not long after, the torn wound actually disappeared. Is there a mistake? Zhang Xiaohua screamed. This kind of fighting, how could she win? Sure enough, when the heaven-reaching ape's wounds were no longer painful, it immediately faced the sky and howled. The other heaven-reaching apes also echoed in the same manner. Zhang Xiaohua reached out his hand and took out the dragon-binding hoop from his chest. The ferocious beasts in the ruins of Huan were very proud and did not attack in groups. He could use this weakness to capture them one by one. However, seeing the dragon-binding ring expanding in midair, the Tongtian ape was not afraid. After seeing that its fist was ineffective, it immediately hammered its chest with its hand and spat out a green gas from its mouth. The green gas turned into a thin stick in midair and hit the dragon-binding ring. Zhang Xiaohua formed a seal and hit the dragon-binding ring. With a crisp sound, the green stick turned into nothingness and the dragon-binding ring was also sent flying. After a few rounds, Zhang Xiaohua knew that the dragon-binding ring was useless. At this time, the Tongtian ape sneered. It no longer used its long arms to fight the enemy. It only opened its mouth, and the green stick was aimed at Zhang Xiaohua's head. Seeing the stick close to her, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes suddenly lit up. Wood element energy is lively and has the meaning of life. Seeing how the Tongtian ape can heal its wounds so quickly, I know that. However, the 5 elements restrict each other. Although metal restricts wood and wood restricts water, can I use the golden pearl that I got from the sharp gold palace yesterday? But then, Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. That golden pearl could not be used by herself. There was only a lot of heaven and earth yuan qi in it. How could she defeat the Tongtian ape? Since she thought about the 5 elements restricting each other, Zhang Xiaohua thought about many things. She unconsciously slapped her forehead and smiled bitterly. Among the 5 elements, although metal restricts wood, even a farmer can use fire to burn wood. I have a ready-made fire talisman here. Why not use it? As she spoke, she took out a few jade talismans that were the size of small copper coins. With a wave of her hand, she hit a few of the Tongtian apes. The Tongtian apes were howling with joy. How could they care? They stretched out their hands and impatiently wanted to hit the jade talisman away. With a soft pa sound, a wisp of flame burned on the Tongtian ape's hand. The Tongtian apes had been in the ruins of Huan for many years and had never come into contact with fire. When they were burned, they were first stunned. Then, they felt an instinctive fear. Their other hand immediately slapped to extinguish the wisp of flame. Unfortunately, this was not an ordinary fire. The moment their other hand touched the wisp of flame, it immediately burned. The Tongtian apes did not have any experience in extinguishing fire. In just a short while, their entire bodies were burning. The pain that came from their bodies was different from before. The wounds that were burned by the fire would not heal in a short period of time. Instantly, the Tongtian apes exploded. How could they be bothered to find trouble with Zhang Xiaohua? They scattered in all directions and ran away. Hee. Zhang Xiaohua jumped onto a pillar and chased after a Tongtian ape that was running towards the center of the ruins of Huan. There was no water source in the ruins of Huan. The Tongtian ape only ran for a short while before its entire body was burning. Then, it scurried in all directions, messing up the pillars and broken walls. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to give it a stab with her sword, but at this moment, the Tongtian ape was in a frenzy. How could she have the chance to do so? After waiting for a while, the Tongtian ape's breath gradually weakened and its howls became softer. Zhang Xiaohua then used her sword to cut its throat to reduce the pain. The fire talisman was very domineering. Not long after, the huge Tong Tian ape was burned to ashes. Zhang Xiaohua scanned the ashes with her divine sense. Indeed, there was a small green bead that was the size of a mung bean in the ashes. She waved her hand and held it in her hand. It was the same as the one she got from the saber-toothed tiger. Then, Zhang Xiaohua used her lightness technique to search around. She found the other few green beads as well. Only then did she feel at ease and continued to move forward. Perhaps there were only a few Tong Tian apes nearby. Although Zhang Xiaohua occasionally heard high-pitched cries, they were all very far away. If it was purely for the green beads, Zhang Xiaohua did not want to hurt any innocent people. She picked the original route and continued to move forward. There was no need to elaborate on the dangers along the way. There were a few small green sticks that were similar to the Tong Tian apes. The slightly bigger ones were huge wooden sticks. Fortunately, there was no frightening scene like the one she encountered at the beginning. However, as she walked, Zhang Xiaohua discovered something unusual. She saw that within the ruins, there were suddenly more white skeletons. From the edge of the Huan ruins to here, Zhang Xiaohua only saw a female disciple who was killed by the black light in the Ruijin Hall. She did not see any corpses and thought that there were no traces of people here. However, there were suddenly more white skeletons. Didn't it mean that many people had been here before? -4. Chapter 906. As the number of bones increased, Zhang Xiaohua naturally became more careful. Just like before, he activated the Crimson Spirit Protection and the Defensive Jade Talisman and inspected the scattered bones. The injuries were also different. Some were on the head, some were on the ribs, and most of them were not injured. Presumably, the bones were not injured. However, the wounds that could be seen were all fine and small holes, as if they were pierced by needles. This is strange. If they were killed by the sky-piercing ape, their bones would definitely be smashed. How could they be intact? Even if there were complete bones, it would be a hole the size of a bowl. How could it be so small? Could there be other ferocious beasts? Zhang Xiaohua muttered to himself. However, since there were so many bones, it naturally meant that the route was correct. Even if it was not the same palace as the Ruijin Palace, with Zhang Xiaohua's greedy character, there was no reason for him not to go. Holding the great wisdom sword in his hand, Chasing Dream was also driven within 10 feet in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua steadily moved forward. After walking for half a meal's time, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly stopped. It was not because of the shocking number of bones here, but because his nose suddenly smelled a faint fragrance. This fragrance was very strange. Although it was extremely faint, it was very refreshing when one smelled it. However, if one smelled it carefully, it would be a little fleeting. Even Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts were about to be affected, and he was gradually pulled to pursue it. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's heart suddenly felt alarmed. A thin silk vine appeared from the messy ruins under his feet. Like a green lightning, it directly wrapped around Zhang Xiaohua's ankle. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense had been released all along, but his mind was attracted by the fragrance. He was not careful and was entangled by the silk vine. Seeing the thin silk vine, he immediately understood the cause of death of the bones he saw earlier. How could he not be alarmed? With a slight movement of his finger, Chasing Dream whizzed over and cut the silk vine with extreme precision. The Chasing Dream was extremely sharp, and the vine was immediately cut in half. However, the vine seemed to have a life of its own. After a faint green liquid seeped out, the vine trembled twice as if it was in pain. With a whoosh, the vine didn't withdraw. Instead, it raised its head and wanted to wrap around Zhang Xiaohua's body. How can this be? Zhang Xiaohua thought as she waved the great wisdom sword in her hand and smashed the stem of the vine on the ground in front of her. Pa! The silk vine broke from the stem, and the front part fell to the ground like a dead snake. As for the rest, they immediately retreated when they saw how powerful it was. Before Zhang Xiaohua could pick up the broken vine to take a closer look, there was a sudden gust of wind. When Zhang Xiaohua raised his head to look, he could not help but be shocked. She saw that all around the ruins where she was standing, from an unknown place, Perhaps it was the broken wall, the cracks in the ground, or the cracks in the pillars. Countless vines like willow branches filled the sky and covered Zhang Xiaohua from all directions. Could it be that the willow tree has turned into a spirit? Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. She stabbed the great wisdom sword into the ground and took out the nameless long sword from her waist. Those vines were really powerful. Zhang Xiaohua had just pulled out the sharp sword when countless vines flew towards Zhang Xiaohua from all directions to attack her. Although Zhang Xiaohua was shocked, she didn't panic. She had already tested it with Chasing Dream and Great Wisdom, and it wasn't particularly hard to deal with. Thus, she formed a seal with her left hand and controlled Chasing Dream within a radius of 1 zhang. She tried her best to cut off the vines that had penetrated deep into the area. At the same time, she injected true qi into the long sword in her right hand, activating the sword ray and waving it around her body. Perhaps there had never been such a scene in the Huan Su. A small sword was like a dancing spirit, dancing wantonly within a radius of 1 zhang. Every time it moved, a section of green vines would fall to the ground. Every time a section of green vines fell to the ground, a small stream of green liquid would splash out. The same went for the 3 qi long sword ray in the small sword. Not long after, countless broken vines fell to the ground below Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua laughed and took a few steps forward. There was nothing in front of him again. Ever since he entered the Huan Su, he had never felt so refreshed. Although these vines were fatal to ordinary experts of the pugilistic world, to Zhang Xiaohua, they were just like the willow branches that he used to play with in the Guozhuang house when he was young. They didn't have any killing power at all. In another half a cup of tea's time, the ground was splattered with countless green liquid. Within the liquid, there was a faint fragrance. It was what Zhang Xiaohua had smelled earlier. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was casually killing the vines and moving forward, the countless vines suddenly disappeared as if they were blown away by the wind. At the same time, a piercing whistling sound came from afar. That laughter was like a whistle. It was extremely sharp and didn't seem like it came from a human's mouth. Before Zhang Xiaohua could hesitate, a row of afterimages descended from the sky. It was a branch that was as thick as a bowl and as soft as a willow branch. It was like a long whip that was commonly seen in the pugilistic world. However, the speed of the whip was so fast that one couldn't see the real body. One could only see a row of afterimages. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua jumped into the air without hesitation. He wanted to dodge the whip first. However, just as the branch passed under him, the front end of the branch swung again. It came crashing down on him. Zhang Xiaohua pointed his finger, and Chasing Dream flew far away. He pounced towards the head of the branch that was 10 feet away. Then, he waved his right hand and the light of the sword exploded. In an instant, he slashed at the branch that was heading towards him. With a qi sound, the light of the sword slashed at the branch. It went in, and a fragrant liquid spurted out. However, the light of the sword only went in. It couldn't cut it. The branch trembled and shook off the sword. At this moment, Chasing Dream had also pierced into the head of the branch. With a thought, it went through the body of the branch and directly pierced through the thick branch. In pain, the branch waved its claws and bared its fangs in the air. Miraculously, with just these few movements, the small hole that Chasing Dream had pierced through was already gradually shrinking. The wound caused by the sword light was also gradually shrinking. The power of wood, the power of life. It is indeed extraordinary. Zhang Xiaohua instantly understood the meaning of the power of wood. Even weapons like Chasing Dream and the long sword's power of metal could not restrain the huge branch. Seeing that the weapon was ineffective, Zhang Xiaohua's first thought was to use fire talismans. He shook his hand and kept the long sword. A few fire talismans flew out. With a pu-pu sound, a few wisps of fire ignited on the branch. However, these wisps of fire were too small. Compared to the huge branch, they were not enough. Even Zhang Xiaohua was anxious. The branch seemed to be in pain as the wisps of fire burned. However, immediately after, a light green liquid spurted out from the branch and suppressed the wisps of fire and extinguished them. The miracle that Zhang Xiaohua hoped for did not happen in the end. Sigh. Is the battle of the immortal Tao so complicated? Zhang Xiaohua frowned and began to think about what kind of weapon to use. After thinking for a while, he still could not think of anything. The weapons in the money pouch seemed to be useless against the branch. At this moment, the branch brandished its claws and brandished its fangs again. In a moment, Zhang Xiaohua's heroic spirit was unleashed. He reached out and pulled the great wisdom sword out from the ground. He laughed and said, "It's just a willow branch. I want to see what kind of trouble you can cause after I smash you into pieces." As he spoke, he waved the heavy sword and smashed it towards the branch. That branch was very nimble. However, it could not withstand Zhang Xiaohua's sword techniques. With a poochie sound, the great wisdom sword pierced into the branch. A light green liquid spurted out. Zhang Xiaohua did not look carefully. He pulled out the great wisdom sword, and with a shake of his hand, the sword flowed out. With a schwa 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 sound, 7 to 8 fist-sized holes were left on the thick branch. Zhang Xiaohua withdrew her sword and was about to stab again. Who knew that the branch's reaction was different from before? The branch's trembling was light at first. Then, it expanded and did not stop. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense swept over. To her surprise, she discovered that the places where the great wisdom sword pierced were different from the wounds caused by Zhu Ming and the others. They did not heal. Instead, the light green liquid did not stop flowing out. Ha ha ha, Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. Everything has its vanquisher. Then, it was Zhang Xiaohua's turn to bare her fangs and brandish her claws. She leaped up and used the dream-weaving sword technique to stab at the trembling branch in midair. With a few pu-pu-pu sounds, a few more holes appeared on the branch. The branch circled around and whipped towards Zhang Xiaohua's waist. Zhang Xiaohua dodged, but the branch took advantage of Zhang Xiaohua's dodging. With a so sound, it actually retreated. How could Zhang Xiaohua let it go? She leaped up and chased after it. The speed at which the branch retracted was very fast. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua lost track of it. After walking for another 5 minutes, another damaged palace appeared in front of her. Beside a pillar, there was a plaque with the words Greenwood Palace written on it. Seeing the plaque of the Greenwood Palace, Zhang Xiaohua's heart tightened. Needless to say, if she continued to walk forward, she would definitely reach the Ruoshui Palace, Fire Palace, and Thick Earth Palace. However, she did not know if there was a Mo Shui Palace in the center of the ruins of Huanshu within the Five Elements Great Formation. Looking around, this Greenwood Palace was not much different from the Fire Palace. According to her memory, Zhang Xiaohua walked in fearlessly with the great wisdom sword in her hand. Outside the Greenwood Palace, there were not many bones left. There were only a few scattered bones. They must have been injured by the thick branch. After entering the Greenwood Palace, it was extremely clean. Presumably, no one had escaped the attack of the branch and died on the way to the Greenwood Palace. However, what was in this Greenwood Palace that was worth so many people coming here? Why did no one go to the Ruijin Palace, which was also the eye of the formation? Zhang Xiaohua looked at the Greenwood Palace that was densely covered with green vines. She flashed and went straight in. When she arrived at the eye of the formation, she could not help but be dumbfounded. -4. Chapter 907. What entered his sight was a thick tree trunk that was about 10 feet wide. If a normal tree was this thick, it would definitely be shockingly tall as well. However, this tree was only 30 feet tall, almost as tall as the collapsed palace. The strangest thing was not the height of this tree. People called it a tree because it had lush branches and leaves. However, this tree only had a thick branch at the top of the tree. The other parts of the tree only had small branches. It looked very uncoordinated. The entire tree trunk looked very withered and yellow. Other than the thick branch that was green, the other branches were mostly yellow. This branch, needless to say, was the branch that attacked Zhang Xiaohua just now. At this moment, the branch had already shrunk back to its original appearance. However, the place where it was pierced by the great wisdom sword still had not healed. Green juice continuously seeped out, and the entire open space was filled with this fragrance. As if it could see Zhang Xiaohua's arrival, the branch lightly waved in the air, emitting a crackling sound. It seemed to be intimidating, but in reality, it revealed its fear. Eh, why did someone come in here? Zhang Xiaohua sized up the big tree in the open space and also looked around. Just opposite her, under a broken stone pillar, she saw a set of white bones. This person can actually come here. It is enough to show that he is not ordinary. Zhang Xiaohua inwardly muttered to herself. Her gaze landed on a jade box that was commonly seen in the fragrant religion. Beside the jade box, there was a small package. The clothes on the white bones had already rotted, but the package was still intact. Presumably, the quality of the package was special. Zhang Xiaohua was even more concerned about the things inside. Pop, while Zhang Xiaohua was looking ahead, the thick branch gradually became impatient. It swayed a few times in the air, and like a sharp sword, it pierced towards Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua chuckled. Her body nimbly jumped up, and she did not fight with the branch. She only rushed towards the big tree that was similar to a tree stump. The branch seemed to know Zhang Xiaohua's intention and became even more flustered. It waved with a shwa-shwa sound, wanting to block Zhang Xiaohua. Although Zhang Xiaohua's ethereal steps was not a divine ability of the immortal Tao, it was extremely nimble within the small space. The branch tried to block her several times, but it was useless. A few times, it was pierced by Zhang Xiaohua's great wisdom sword, adding a few more holes. Not long later, Zhang Xiaohua had already rushed to the front of the big tree. Thinking about the white bones on the way, Zhang Xiaohua did not have any mercy in her heart. She stretched out her hand, and the great wisdom sword lightly pierced into the thick tree trunk. However, it was not like what she had imagined. There was no green juice spurting out. It was just like piercing into a withered tree stump. Zhang Xiaohua twisted the heavy sword, and a big hole was drilled into the tree trunk. What fell from the tree trunk were some withered tree dregs. It was comparable to the firewood that Zhang Xiaohua picked up in the Guozhuang house. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua piercing the heavy sword into the tree trunk, the branch seemed to know that its end was near. It immediately whipped towards Zhang Xiaohua in a frenzy. Zhang Xiaohua did not bother with it and swung the heavy sword, cutting a big hole in the tree trunk with a few slashes. She flashed into the tree and continued to chop down the tree. Indeed, this big tree, it would be more appropriate to say that it was a tree stump. Chopping it down was not an easy task. Not long later, Zhang Xiaohua, with the great wisdom sword in his hand, came out from the other side of the tree stump. It was exactly as he had guessed. Most of the tree stump was withered wood. Only the center of the tree trunk had green juice flowing out. He cut off the green part in the middle of the tree stump, and the branches waving outside immediately stopped. There was no sign of life at all. Looking at this thick tree stump, Zhang Xiaohua already knew that under this tree was the eye of the five elements formation. He threw the heavy sword away and stretched out both hands, pushing on the tree stump. He shouted loudly, and with the strength of his two arms, the thick tree trunk shook violently. Ah! Zhang Xiaohua shouted 3 times in a row. The huge tree trunk shook a few times, and the entire ground shook. Zhang Xiaohua actually pushed the huge tree trunk to the side, and even the roots of the tree trunk were exposed. Seeing that the tree roots were almost as thick as a person, Zhang Xiaohua stuck out his tongue, picked up the heavy sword, and chopped randomly. After cutting off the roots, he stood under the tree stump, bent down, and raised both hands, like a deity holding up the sky. Open! Zhang Xiaohua shouted again. This time, there was a loud bang. The huge tree finally fell to the ground, and the ruins in front of it were smashed into smithereens. Zhang Xiaohua clapped his hands and said with a smile, "This Xiaoxia has not done this kind of shady business for a long time. I'm not unfamiliar with it." Walking to the middle of the big tree again, Zhang Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense, but he frowned a little. He saw that at the root of the big tree, there was still a small tree root exuding vitality, and below the small tree root was the eye of the formation. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua took the heavy sword again and cleaned up the surroundings, only exposing the small tree root. The small tree root was very cute. It was only 3 inches long, and it was like a chopstick. There were 3 small buds at the front, and there was a small tail at the bottom. The strong vitality came from this small tree root. Looking at the small sapling in his hand, and then at the huge tree trunk lying on the ground, Zhang Xiaohua knew that this must be a kind of strange species. He only pondered for a moment and then made up his mind. He cast a few spells on the small tree root, then took out a jade box and put it away properly. After putting away the small tree root, Zhang Xiaohua cleaned up the place where the tree root was, revealing the eye of the formation of the Greenwood Palace. It was a green jade box. Zhang Xiaohua looked at it with his divine sense, and there was no restriction on it. Thinking about the power of the strange tree just now, there was indeed no need to add any extra restrictions. Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand, and the jade box opened. A dim green brilliance was reflected from the jade box. The source of the brilliance was a wooden bead that was similar to the golden bead. The green brilliance contained a strong vitality, and it was the power of wood. Good stuff. Zhang Xiaohua secretly sighed and picked up the jade box from the ground. Like the sharp gold palace, the eye of the formation was broken, and the whole Greenwood Palace shook slightly. Zhang Xiaohua was not in a hurry. He took out an 8 trigrams purple gold furnace and suppressed it on the eye of the formation of the Greenwood Palace. The whole formation was temporarily stabilized again. After placing a restriction on the jade box, Zhang Xiaohua placed the wooden bead and the golden bead together. Until now, he still did not know what the use of the 5 elements beads would be. However, thinking about how this 5 elements array protected the whole Huan Su, it must be an extraordinary item to be able to be the eye of the formation. Since it was an ownerless item, of course, only the virtuous could occupy it. The white bones in the Greenwood Palace were the same as the ones he saw outside the palace. The ribs and spine in front of the chest were shattered, and it should have been killed by the strange tree. Zhang Xiaohua did not see anything valuable around the strange tree. If it was not taken away by someone, it would have fallen into the jade box in front of the white bones. Zhang Xiaohua cautiously used his divine sense to check the surroundings of the white bones. Then, he waved his hand, and the jade box flew into his hand. The lid of the box was opened, and there was something covered with silk. As the lid was opened, a strong fragrance and dense heaven and earth yuan qi surged out. Zhang Xiaohua was even more surprised. He lifted the silk and revealed the thing inside. What? What is this? Zhang Xiaohua was really shocked. After entering the Huan Su, everything he saw was strange. No matter if it was the heaven-reaching ape, the saber-toothed tiger, or the strange tree, none of them surprised him as much as the thing inside the jade box. Under the silk, there was something that looked like a small baby. That thing's 4 limbs, head, and body were all very lifelike. It was just like a living baby. Only now, that thing looked withered, like an apple that had lost its moisture. It was abnormally dry. After covering the fruit with the silk and keeping the jade box, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but frown. According to his estimation, this thing might be the thing that those people who died on the road wanted to get. It should also be the fruit of that strange tree. However, what kind of tree could bear a fruit that looked like a baby? This is really puzzling, Immortal Tao. Why is it so colorful? After keeping the jade box, Zhang Xiaohua's gaze landed on the small package on the ground. That package was not big and was about the size of the jade box. After opening it, there were a few jade slips, a few small booklets, and 2 silk slips that were similar to the package. On the silk slips, there were words written in blood that had long dried up. Zhang Xiaohua was not in a hurry to read the blood letters. He picked up the booklets and flipped through them casually. They seemed to be some kind of peerless martial arts cultivation method that Zhang Xiaohua had no fate with. Those jade slips were the same as the jade slips from the Sharp Golden Hall. There were no restrictions on them, but Zhang Xiaohua was not in the mood to read them. He only saw that there was sufficient heaven and earth yuan qi in the booklets. The things recorded would not disappear for the time being, so he just put them aside. Sigh, there's actually nothing good. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and finally picked up the 2 blood letters. There were only a few words on the top, and it said, Yunai, Mo Qingyan of the Sharp Golden Hall. The one who saw this blood letter must be a disciple of the Lingering Fragrance Peak. Please send the contents of the jade box back to the Lingering Fragrance Peak and hand it to Senior Sister Jing Yi. The martial arts cultivation method in this package and the jade piece picked up from the Huan Su can be used as a reward. If the jade piece is useless, you can bring it to a Mo Xian Palace to exchange for other things you need. Senior Sister Jing Yi? Could it be the current Abbess Jing-yi? Zhang Xiaohua was a little surprised, but he suddenly thought of something that Meng said before he left. Abbess Jing-yi also had a disciple of the sharp golden hall who was close to her in the early years. Could it be this person? Of course, Meng only heard about it from hearsay. He did not know the name of the disciple of the sharp golden hall. Zhang Xiaohua was also not sure. When he opened the second blood letter, he could not help but sigh. -4. Chapter 908. The second letter was written in blood. I left Jingyi, my love. On the Lingxiang Peak, there were 3 tests of love. Our love was stronger than gold, and we worked together to achieve success. It's just that the heavens have no eyes, and we were not fated to be together. I was indignant and knew that only by stepping into the path of immortality could I have the possibility of continuing my previous fate with my love. According to ancient legends, there was a path to heaven in Huanshu, and there was an immortal fruit in the Greenwood Palace. If a martial artist took it, he could step into the path of immortality. I disregarded the prohibition and left without saying goodbye. I entered Huanshu without permission, hoping to have this immortal fate. However, I tried my best and narrowly escaped death. When I picked the last grass wandan, I was found by the tree spirit and was seriously injured here. I don't have long to live and have no fate with the path of immortality. I left this thing as a gift to my love, hoping to step into the path of immortality and spread the power of the incense. I have no fate with my love, and also have no fate with the path of immortality. I have no resentment. It's enough that my love could care about my feelings in her spare time. Emo Qingshan's last words. Sigh. Zhang Xiaohua finished reading the blood letter and couldn't help but sigh. This Emo Qingshan was really unlucky. Out of the 3 tests of love, he and Nanjing easily passed the 2 most difficult tests. Only the final test of fate was missing a blood wolf. In Huanshu, although he picked the last grass wandan, he was still found by the tree spirit and lost his life. The things in his hands could not be used and others benefited. It was really a difference of 1,000 miles. Or it could be said that Emo Qingshan and Nanjingyi were really not fated. Looking at himself and his dream, he never knew that the incense cult had the 3 trials of love. He just wanted to see his dream, so he ignored the cult's rules and rushed to the lingering fragrance peak. In order to save his life, his dream jumped off the cliff. The 2 of them passed the 2 most difficult trials of the 3 trials of love in a muddle-headed way. As for the 3rd test of fate, cough cough, it was even more needless to say. Although Chen Xian said clearly that almost all the beasts in the testing forest were killed, there were hundreds of blood wolf tails in his belt that he brought back from the Yulon Grand Canyon. He only had to pretend a few times in the testing forest, and 100 blood wolf tails would come out from his belt. It did not take any effort at all. But is this the fate that the heavens speak of? Zhang Xiaohua secretly gave herself a thumbs up and made up her mind to carry forward the behavior of picking up trash. Who knew when trash would become fate? Thinking about the process of him stepping onto the path of immortality, and then looking at Emo Qingshan's encounter, he was actually killed by the tree spirit after obtaining the Chao Huan pill. He felt even more sad than the people outside the Greenwood Palace. Could this also be the fate that the path of immortality talked about? If you don't have the immortal fate, you won't have the opportunity to consume the immortal pill even if you obtain it. Abbess Jing-yi, on the other hand, had long been the leader of the aroma sect and had stepped onto the path of immortality. Even this Chao Huandan had been branded as Senior Sister Jing-yi. Perhaps this was also a mortal fate. But this so-called Chao Huan pill has already withered to such a state. Can it still be consumed? Zhang Xiaohua was a little confused, but the qi of heaven and earth and the rich fragrance in the jade box could not be faked. Perhaps it really could be used. Should I return it to Abbess Jing-yi or keep it for myself? This thought only flashed through Zhang Xiaohua's mind for a moment. Since she had already read Emo Qingshan's blood letter, she should be faithful and return this Chao Huan pill to Emo Xiangong. Regardless of whether this Chao Huan pill was useless, as cheap as straw, or if it still had an effect, as precious as an immortal pill, she couldn't be greedy. This thing was exchanged with Emo Qingshan's life, and he gave it to his love. Zhang Xiaohua put everything away and saluted the skeleton. Emo, Senior, don't worry. I already know about your matter. Although we haven't met, your matter played a certain role in my meeting with the person in my dream. I definitely won't touch your bloodletter and jade box. When I return to Lingering Fragrance Peak, I'll give them to the leader. Oh, that's right. I won't bring your remains back. After all, you're already a skeleton now. You're no longer the elegant young man in the leader's eyes. If she sees an eerie skeleton, it will damage your image in her heart for no reason. Don't you think so? I believe that even if you come back to life, you'll raise both hands and feet to support my decision. Then, Zhang Xiaohua dug a hole on the ground and buried Imo Qingshan's remains. After burying Imo Qingshan's remains, the sky was dark. Zhang Xiaohua didn't continue on his journey. Instead, he set up the restriction and sat cross-legged, closing his eyes to cultivate. After a moment, Zhang Xiaohua opened his eyes and took out the few jade slips that Imo Qingshan left behind. Along the way, he had been releasing his divine sense, but he didn't see any jade slips that had the fluctuation of heaven and earth's vital energy. Imo Qingshan was only a martial artist, but he was actually able to pick up so many jade slips in the Huansu. It was really strange. The jade slips didn't record any cultivation techniques, but some immortal arts. Zhang Xiaohua took a simple look and knew that it wasn't something that he could cultivate with his current qi refinement middle stage, so he skimmed through it. However, when he saw one of the arts, he couldn't help but be delighted. The ancient words on the jade slip were transfiguration art. It's widely rumored in the pugilistic world that there's a transfiguration art that can change a person's appearance into another person's. It's really magical. What is this transfiguration art? After Zhang Xiaohua read it from the beginning to the end, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. It turned out that this transfiguration art could change a person's bones, completely turning them into another person. It was similar to the transfiguration art through different means. Perhaps it should be said that it was much more exquisite than the transfiguration art. The transfiguration art could only change a person's appearance, and through changing clothes and other means, conceal the eyes of others. If a person was close to the person and looked closely, they would be able to see the traces left behind by the transfiguration art on the person's face. The transfiguration art could also change a person's appearance by changing the bones on the person's face. It was a kind of change that came from the inside out, and there wouldn't be any traces on the person's face. In particular, the transfiguration art could change the height of a person's bones, thus changing the person's height. This wasn't something that the transfiguration art could do. Of course, since the transfiguration art was so useful, the conditions to use it were even more stringent. Without a profound cultivation, how could one change the bones at will? Although the jade slip didn't state what kind of cultivation one needed to practice the transfiguration art, looking at the cryptic chant, Zhang Xiaohua knew that it wasn't easy. Although she knew that practicing the transfiguration art was very difficult, Zhang Xiaohua still memorized the chant from beginning to end. Firstly, he was temporarily bored and didn't have anything to do. Secondly, he was young and curious. He imagined that if he could change his appearance and not only stare at Ren Xiaoyao's name, but also change a person, it would definitely be more fun. That chant was very hard to pronounce and also difficult to understand. Zhang Xiaohua compared it to the memory in the jade slip while trying to figure it out word by word. From time to time, according to his own understanding, he would apply the divine ability of the chant to his body. Although it was an extremely simple use, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly discovered that it seemed to be very easy for him to use this method. As long as he truly understood it and used the chant correctly, his bones would obediently change according to his imagination. It wasn't as difficult as the jade slip said. What's going on? Could it be that I'm a genius? Or is this transfiguration art specially designed for me? Zhang Xiaohua thought happily. In fact, he already had a faint answer in his heart. The Big Dipper mystical fist tempered his bones every day. The strength of his arms was still constantly increasing. This ability to control his bones at will might be one of the effects of the Big Dipper mystical fist. With such a convenient condition, how could Zhang Xiaohua not focus on cultivating the transfiguration technique? A few days later, Zhang Xiaohua was in Lihua Hall, which was not too far away from the dark clouds in the center of Huansu. When Zhang Xiaohua took out a fiery red bead from the formation eye of Lihua Hall, A few crows that could spit fire from their beaks cawed and flew away in all directions. These few days, Zhang Xiaohua came out of Greenwood Hall and entered the area of Ruoshui Hall. He killed a few water-repellent rhinoceroses, dodged a group of water snakes, broke the formation of Ruoshui 3000 in Ruoshui Hall, and obtained a blue water bead. He then entered the area of Lihua Hall. Lihua Hall was different from the other places. The temperature was extremely high, and the broken walls were slightly red. With Zhang Xiaohua's current cultivation, he was not afraid of cold or heat. The heat was not a problem for him. After killing a group of fire wolves and fire snakes that were similar to water snakes, he came to Lihua Hall. However, whether it was Ruoshui Hall or Lihua Hall, Zhang Xiaohua did not see any white bones. He thought that it was a rare place. However, Zhang Xiaohua encountered a problem in Lihua Hall. The formation eye of Lihua Hall was protected by the Great Fire Crow Formation. Zhang Xiaohua was trapped for half a day and was helpless. Even if he took out the newly obtained small mirror, it would not cause any harm to them. In the end, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to try one by one to see which one would work. In the end, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to try one by one to see which one would work. In the end, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to try one by one to see which one would work. In the end, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to try one by one in his money pouch to see which one would work. In the end, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to try one by one to see which one would work. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. Although he didn't know how to use it, he didn't ask for a detailed explanation. As long as it could scare the crows and save him from the Great Fire Crow Formation, it would be enough. Just now, when he was holding the paperweight to scare the crows, he accidentally triggered a mechanism. The beast head on the paperweight actually shot out dozens of faint red lines, sucking the dozens of crows into the paperweight. Only then did the Great Fire Crow Formation break, leaving only a few fire crows to flee for their lives. Everything has its nemesis. Zhang Xiaohua was still sighing. He never thought that this thing, which was used as a paperweight, would actually be a Dharma artifact. Moreover, it looked like an extremely powerful Dharma artifact. It was able to completely absorb the dozens of fire crows. However, he was immediately puzzled. Anything with a space could not be put into a money bag. The belt could only be placed outside, but how could this paperweight be put into the money bag? -4. Chapter 909. After putting away the beast head paperweight, Zhang Xiaohua came out of the Lihua Palace and looked at the plaque that fell on the ground. Lihua Palace. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but think of Zhang Pinger, who was far away in the Lihua Palace on Lingering Fragrance Peak. Seeing something reminded one of people. I wonder if she's in a good mood now? Thinking of Zhang Pinger, Zhang Xiaohua immediately thought of Emo Xian's dream of waiting for him in the palace. Zhang Xiaohua's heart was filled with a burst of sweetness. The feeling of someone waiting to return home was really wonderful. Only when one truly had this kind of concern could one understand the true meaning within. Perhaps I should have gone back earlier. Zhang Xiaohua, who was already somewhat used to wandering, suddenly felt like a wandering prodigal son and had an additional feeling of homesickness. After leaving the Lihua Palace, there was only the thick earth palace left in the Five Elements formation. Zhang Xiaohua had only seen the disciples of the Lihua Palace on Lingering Fragrance Peak and had only interacted with the disciples of the Ruijin Palace. She had also heard some stories about the elders of the Greenwood Palace. However, she didn't know anything about the weak Water Palace and the thick Earth Palace at all. Therefore, the thick Earth Palace that she was about to enter was filled with a strange feeling. Zhang Xiaohua held the Great Wisdom Sword and felt that the weather was gradually cooling down. The crimson color of the ruins on the ground was also gradually receding. She knew that the thick Earth Palace was in front of her. When she came in, Zhang Xiaohua had already encountered several kinds of ferocious beasts that the disciple of the Ruijin Palace, Ren Wufeng, had mentioned. Only the mountain-shaking bear had not been encountered. As the name implied, this bear was definitely very strong. Perhaps it was in front of her. After walking for another half a day, it was always peaceful. Not only did she not encounter any mountain-shaking bear, but she also didn't encounter any dangerous mechanisms. Occasionally, Zhang Xiaohua would accidentally trigger some mechanisms, but they all had a strong start and weak finish. They could only scare Zhang Xiaohua and didn't have any effect at all. After passing through several palaces, Zhang Xiaohua knew this must be because the formation eye in the thick earth palace is not working. The qi of heaven and earth contained in the earth beads should be exhausted soon. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like this. However, the thick earth palace should be the most protected place in the innermost part of the five elements formation. It should be the place with the most abundant spiritual qi of heaven and earth. How could it be exhausted? While she was thinking, Zhang Xiaohua heard a loud and clear cry not far from her side. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and swept to the side with her divine sense. She found a place to hide and hid. Just like before, as soon as she hid, a huge black bear with long black fur ran over from afar. When the black bear came near, it stood upright and was 3 times as tall as Zhang Xiaohua. Its 2 huge front paws swung left and right in front of its chest, which was comparable to the action of the heaven-reaching ape when it beat its own chest. The black bear sniffed the air with its small eyes. Without any hesitation, it immediately headed towards the place where Zhang Xiaohua was hiding. Oh no! Why is this mountain-shaking bear's nose more sensitive than the saber-toothed tiger, heaven-reaching ape, and other ferocious beasts? Even the fire wolf's nose can't compare to it. Zhang Xiaohua really admired these ferocious beasts at this time. However, when the mountain-shaking bear found Zhang Xiaohua's hiding place, although it could smell some scent, there was no trace of anything unusual. Other than the broken pillars and the collapsed walls, the mountain-shaking bear crawled down again and sniffed carefully. Then, it roared angrily, as if it was angry. It raised its huge fan-like bear paw and slammed it directly at the broken pillar. With a loud rumble, the pillar was actually broken into 2, and Zhang Xiaohua's figure flashed out from one of the pillars. Strange. Zhang Xiaohua leaped onto the other side of the wall and asked curiously, "I've already concealed myself. How did you know I was here?" When the mountain-shaking bear saw Zhang Xiaohua's sudden appearance, it jumped in shock and retreated half a step. Then, it roared again and slapped down with its paw. Seeing mountain-shaking bear's reaction, Zhang Xiaohua also came to a realization. This mountain-shaking bear did not see him. He must have smelled his aura, but could not find him. So he flew into a rage out of humiliation and used the pillar to vent his anger. Coincidentally, she was on the pillar and was accidentally found by the mountain-shaking bear. The mountain-shaking bear was very tall. When it stood up, it was about the same height as the broken wall. When it slapped down with its paw, the sharp cold light of the bear's paw could be seen from afar. If one was hit by this huge paw, even if one didn't die, a large piece of flesh would be ripped off. Zhang Xiaohua raised the great wisdom sword and pointed it directly at the mountain-shaking bear's palm. The mountain-shaking bear had no intention of dodging. The sword palm didn't make any sound. Zhang Xiaohua only felt that the sword tip seemed to have hit a rock. It was abnormally hard, and the great wisdom sword couldn't pierce through it. The mountain-shaking bear's paw grabbed and tried to grab the great wisdom sword. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. How could she allow the mountain-shaking bear to grab the sword tip? Forcefully pulling back, she dodged. With a flip of her wrist, the great wisdom sword smashed down with a paw sound, hitting the mountain-shaking bear's arm. Before Zhang Xiaohua could smile, the mountain-shaking bear swung its arm and blocked the great wisdom sword. It seemed that the attack just now had no effect. Although Zhang Xiaohua's attack didn't have any effect, it successfully angered the mountain-shaking bear. The mountain-shaking bear roared and raised its 2 front paws to attack Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua saw that the great wisdom sword was ineffective and took out the nameless dagger. Activating the sword qi, she fought with the mountain-shaking bear. However, after a few rounds, Zhang Xiaohua understood that the mountain-shaking bear not only had boundless strength, its skin was also thick. Even if the sword qi pierced its body, it would turn a deaf ear to it. It didn't care at all. Zhang Xiaohua was really speechless. This mountain-shaking bear was in the 5 elements formation. If it was released into the Jianghu, it would be comparable to a few top experts. It would definitely cause a reign of terror. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua reached out and took out the dragon-binding hoop that she hadn't used in a long time. Forming an incantation, she threw it into the air. When the mountain-shaking bear saw the dragon-binding hoop suddenly expand in the air and cover its head, there was no panic in its eyes. It was just a little dazed. In its small eyes, there was a faint joy. The dragon-binding hoop grew with the wind. When it grew to the same size as the mountain-shaking bear, Zhang Xiaohua had used up a lot of her true qi. Zhang Xiaohua pointed her finger, and the dragon-binding hoop wrapped around the mountain-shaking bear. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. Forming another incantation, the dragon-binding hoop gradually shrank, wanting to bind the mountain-shaking bear. However, the dragon-binding hoop hadn't shrunk much before Zhang Xiaohua couldn't move it. The mountain-shaking bear was like a metal pillar, incomparably hard. No matter how Zhang Xiaohua tried to move the dragon-binding hoop, it couldn't shrink. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua gritted her teeth. She wanted to use her remaining true qi to move the flames within the dragon-binding hoop, wanting to use fire to restrain the mountain-shaking bear's earth. However, the dragon-binding hoop's flames weren't easy to move. In the past, when Zhang Xiaohua refined the flames, it was a huge problem. Now that she didn't have enough true qi, it was even more impossible. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua simply stretched out her hand and took out a few fire talismans. Shaking her hand, she threw them at the mountain-shaking bear. Unexpectedly, most of the fire talismans were sent flying by the mountain-shaking bear's paw. Only a few landed on its body. Almost at the same time, all the fire talismans lit up. To Zhang Xiaohua's surprise, the moment the fire talismans lit up on the mountain-shaking bear's body, it was extinguished by the mountain-shaking bear's paw. It wasn't afraid of fire at all like the sky-piercing ape. What should I do now? This wasn't the first time Zhang Xiaohua had thought of this when she entered the Huansu. Before she could figure it out, the mountain-shaking bear stretched out its waist and grabbed the dragon-binding hoop with its two front paws. How can this be? Zhang Xiaohua panicked. She immediately withdrew the dragon-binding hoop before the bear's paw could reach her. Forget it. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. I should escape first. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua made the wisest decision and decided to run away. Who knew that the moment Zhang Xiaohua leaped onto the broken wall, the mountain-shaking bear's tall figure immediately chased after her. It made a hee-hee sound and waved its two front paws. It looked completely different from the way it was fighting just now. However, how could Zhang Xiaohua notice this at this moment? Seeing the mountain-shaking bear chasing after her, she exerted force on her feet, wanting to escape from this perverted beast's claws. Just as the mountain-shaking bear was chasing Zhang Xiaohua, it let out a long howl. Before the howl had even faded away, the wind from all directions began to welcome it. Listening to the howl, it seemed that the wind was rushing towards Zhang Xiaohua, forming an encirclement. Zhang Xiaohua panicked. She couldn't even deal with one mountain-shaking bear. What would she do if a few more came? Although the mountain-shaking bear looked clumsy, it wasn't clumsy at all when it came to chasing after Zhang Xiaohua. Although it couldn't compare to Zhang Xiaohua's ethereal steps, its running speed wasn't much slower than the Tongtian ape. In just a few moments, Zhang Xiaohua was surrounded by 6 mountain-shaking bears. What should I do? Zhang Xiaohua asked herself again. Fight! Zhang Xiaohua steeled her heart and took out Chasing Dream. She held it in her left hand and waited for the mountain-shaking bears to attack. However, the mountain-shaking bears surrounded Zhang Xiaohua and weren't in a hurry to attack. Instead, they started to communicate with each other. After a while, the 6 mountain-shaking bears revealed joyful smiles and raised their heads. Just like the Tongtian ape, they roared towards the sky. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she was even more curious. However, she didn't dare to let her guard down. At this moment, one of the mountain-shaking bears stood up straight and waved its left front paw. It didn't look like it was attacking at all. It looked more like it was greeting her. This, Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and didn't dare to move casually. The mountain-shaking bear gestured for a long time before retreating. There was a gap in the circle of 6 mountain-shaking bears. However, the direction of the gap wasn't the center of Huansu. What's the meaning of this? Are you letting me go? Or are you asking me to go there? Zhang Xiaohua muttered in her heart. The mountain-shaking bears saw that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't going to leave, and they roared in unison. They even widened the gap as though they wanted Zhang Xiaohua to follow them. Could it be that this mountain-shaking bear was raised by someone? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly thought of this outrageous idea. -4. Chapter 9:10. Zhang Xiaohua felt extremely helpless when she saw the mountain-shaking bears surrounding her like they were escorting a criminal. Indeed, these white bears' bodies were extremely hard and seemed to have a mysterious power that prevented her sword from piercing them. However, she was unable to gain the upper hand because of this. Besides her immortal Dao remarkable powers, her strength, which she was proud of, had been thwarted time and time again in the ruins of Huanshu. Even if she took out all her Dharma artifacts, none of them would be of any use. That mysterious little mirror might have the ability to subdue enemies, but she had yet to refine it successfully. She did not even know what the mirror was used for. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She reached into her pocket to retrieve the beast head paperweight. This thing had sucked in hundreds of fire crows just now. Perhaps it could be used to deal with the mountain-shaking bears. However, just as Zhang Xiaohua's arm was about to move, she suddenly heard a low, muffled sound in front of her. The white bears around her were slightly flustered. The white bear at the front that was scurrying forward suddenly stood up and bared its fangs. It waved its front paws in the air and howled at the sky. This white bear was different from the heaven-reaching ape. The heaven-reaching ape's howl was sharp and sounded like a cry. It was also different from the saber-toothed tiger's howl. The saber-toothed tiger's howl was loud and domineering. The white bear's roar was a little muffled, but it was very thick. Zhang Xiaohua, who was standing at the back, felt dizzy when he heard the roar. Immediately, the essence of herbalism in his Niwen palace sped up and the indescribable discomfort was slightly relieved. After the white bear's roar, it immediately crouched down and ran a few steps forward, crouching on the ground. Its two front paws picked up a thick stone pillar from the ground and lifted it up, causing the roof beam on the other side of the pillar to collapse. As the roof beam collapsed, a cloud of dust flew up. Behind it, another white bear followed closely and walked to the other side of the roof. However, it only used its front paws to push down a broken wall and did not pick up anything. This seems to be a demonstration. Upon seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She reached her hand into her bosom, wanting to take advantage of the white bear's panic to find a solution. However, just as her hand reached into her bosom, she suddenly felt a gust of wind from behind. Without turning her head, Zhang Xiaohua scanned the area with her divine perception. It was a white bear behind her. It swung its front paw and pounced on her back. Zhang Xiaohua did not dare to take it head-on. She took her hand out of her pocket and dodged it. The white bear's beady eyes stared at Zhang Xiaohua for a long time. When it saw that there was nothing unusual, it snorted and stood at the side lazily. Zhang Xiaohua frowned. This white bear is really something. I was in front of it, and when I put my hand into my pocket, it knew and stopped me. When it saw that I didn't take anything out, it stood aside and guarded me. Looking at it, it didn't seem like it wanted to kill me. Could it be that they were really raised by someone? This person was in Huanshu? Are they going to bring me there? Just as she was thinking, there was a commotion in front of her. A series of squeaking noises could be heard. Following that, two white bears rushed forward. Shouting and banging noises could be heard. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense could not reach far and her eyes were blocked by the ruins. She could not see clearly. She looked around and saw that the remaining few white bears were relaxed and did not seem to be nervous. On the left, there was a pillar in front of the white bear. Zhang Xiaohua tried to walk forward. The white bear that attacked her just now tilted its head slightly and did not stop her. When Zhang Xiaohua got closer, the white bear beside the pillar turned its head and bared its fangs in a threatening manner. Zhang Xiaohua knew that these ferocious beasts were psychic. She pointed to the front and then to the top of the pillar, indicating that she wanted to go up and take a look. She did not know if the white bear understood her. It only shook its head slightly and raised its head to look at the front. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua leaped onto the broken pillar and looked forward. When the surrounding white bears saw Zhang Xiaohua's sudden movement, they became restless and were about to make a move. However, when they saw Zhang Xiaohua standing on the pillar without moving, They became quiet and slowly scattered around the pillar to prevent Zhang Xiaohua from escaping. Zhang Xiaohua opened her eyes and took a look. She could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. There were about 10 ferocious beasts that looked like crocodiles. They were crawling on the ground, and their long, sharp mouths were letting out dull and sharp sounds as they pounced towards the 2 white bears to attack. The ferocious beasts only had 4 tiny claws and were much smaller than the crocodiles. Their mouths were similar to the crocodiles, but they were sharper and longer. However, their tails were not very compatible with their bodies as they were too thick. At this moment, a strange ferocious beast dashed towards the white bear from the ground. When it got close, it suddenly turned around and whipped its thick tail towards the white bear. The white bear did not dodge, and the tail collided with each other. The strength of the 2 beasts seemed to be equal, but the strange ferocious beast's body was a little short and its tail was raised to the sky from the impact. Following that, the white bear grabbed the thick tail and scratched it with its claws. The tail was like a fish's tail, nimbly twisting left and right as if it was in pain. Following that, there was a soft sound as the tail hit the white bear's chest. The white bear was furious and used all its strength to slap the strange ferocious beast down to the ground. The stone tiles on the ground were smashed into pieces, but the strange ferocious beast did not seem to be injured. It stood up from the ground and swung its tail, wanting to attack again. Zhang Xiaohua had just experienced the strength of the white bear's claw. However, this strange ferocious beast only had a few traces of blood on its tail. The fierce slap did not injure it at all. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be surprised. Why were the ferocious beasts around the deep earth palace so fierce? The 2 groups of ferocious beasts seemed to be used to fighting. The 2 white bears were almost evenly matched against a dozen strange ferocious beasts. The few white bears that surrounded Zhang Xiaohua also seemed to be watching with interest. Their focus was still on Zhang Xiaohua. After a while, Zhang Xiaohua was a little disappointed. This fight was more of a warm-up than a frolic. Half of the strange ferocious beasts had injuries on their tails, and these injuries were only caused by a few scratches from the bear's paws. As for the 2 white bears, the one that was holding the broken pillar in its hand was hit on the head by a strange beast's tail. Blood dripped from its mouth. Yes, it was bleeding from its teeth. The other bear's chest was hit several times by the tail, but it was not injured. When the strange ferocious beasts saw that they could not do anything to the white bears, they let out a few low growls, turned around, and drilled their heads into the ground, disappearing without a trace. Zhang Xiaohua was disappointed and astonished. She was disappointed that these ferocious beasts did not scatter the white bears so that she could take advantage of the chaos to escape. She was also astonished that after the ferocious beasts drilled into the ground, there were no traces of them on the ground. This clearly meant that the other ferocious beasts also used Earth Escape, or an escape method similar to it. Why couldn't she do it? Maybe I can use Earth Escape here? Seeing that the 2 white bears had returned victorious, Zhang Xiaohua made a gesture and jumped down. Unfortunately, as soon as she landed, the white bear next to her let out a shout and slammed its huge paw on the ground. A strange force hit the spell Zhang Xiaohua had just made. The light shield that had just been activated by the spell immediately shattered without a sound. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that the Earth Palace was a place where the Earth element energy was concentrated. The mountain-shaking bear was very sensitive to the Earth element energy. Wouldn't she be showing off her slight skill in front of an expert if she used Earth Escape here? Fortunately, the white bear broke Zhang Xiaohua's Earth Escape. It only watched vigilantly and did not attack again. Several white bears surrounded Zhang Xiaohua and walked forward for more than half a day. When the sky was about to turn dark, they finally arrived at a slightly desolate place. This place was different from other places. First of all, this direction was not in the direction of the Earth Palace that Zhang Xiaohua originally wanted to go. Second, the white bears did not seem to be walking towards the center of the Huanshu. They only walked around the Huanshu with Huanshu as the center. In other words, after walking for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua was still far away from the center of the Huanshu, the place where the lightning was concentrated. She was even further away from the Earth Palace. The most strange thing was that the surroundings were all broken walls. but this place was a raised slope. When they arrived at the empty slope, the white bears slowed down. Several white bears scattered at the four corners of the slope and stopped moving forward. Although the white bear in front of them did not change its body shape, Zhang Xiaohua clearly felt that there was an additional sense of seriousness on its body. When they arrived here, Zhang Xiaohua also gave up on the idea of escaping. Since the white bears did not have any evil intentions, there was probably someone living in seclusion here. And this person could hide in the Huanshu and tame these white bears. When she thought of this, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood something. Could it be that these white bears are not ferocious beasts of the Huanshu? Otherwise, why would they fight with strange beasts that are also ferocious beasts of the Huanshu? As the white bear went up the slope and walked forward for a while, there were a few huge rocks in front of them. The white bear stopped and snorted. It shook its head and gestured to Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. Looking at the rocks that were about the same size as her, she really did not understand what the white bear meant. "Do you want me to jump up?" Zhang Xiaohua pretended to jump up. Unexpectedly, the white bear opened its bloody mouth and roared. "Do you want me to walk closer?" Zhang Xiaohua pretended to take a step. This time, the white bear did not move. It only shook its head and swayed its small ears, which should be a silent consent. However, looking at the rock, Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. She used her divine perception to scan it and only felt some fluctuations in the qi of heaven and earth. However, she could not see the joints. She had no choice but to walk forward. After walking a few steps, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly felt that something was strange. It was as if she did not walk and the distance between them was still so close. This is strange. Could it be that the uniqueness of this rock lies here? Zhang Xiaohua thought and quickened her pace. It seemed that she was closer to the rock. Zhang Xiaohua looked at her feet. There is nothing wrong with this ground? But when he raised his head to look at the rock again, he could not help but be dumbfounded. -4. Chapter 9:11. He saw that the boulder, which was about the same height as him, was now taller than him by more than a head. What's going on? Zhang Xiaohua panicked. He turned back to look at the white bear and was even more surprised. The white bear was even taller than him. Zhang Xiaohua quickly looked at himself. There was no change to his body. It was exactly the same as before. Zhang Xiaohua frowned. He used ethereal steps and rushed towards the boulder. Zhang Xiaohua was not far from the boulder. He should have been able to reach it in a dozen steps. However, after using ethereal steps, he was only a little closer than before. The boulder was also much taller. Then, he looked at the white bear. It was even taller. Needless to say, Zhang Xiaohua had already realized that the person in front of the boulder must have cast some kind of divine ability on him. He had been shrunk. As long as he walked closer to the boulder, he would slowly shrink. Looking at the tall white bear, Zhang Xiaohua wondered if he would be killed if the white bear slapped him with its paw. However, he knew that as long as the white bear's paw was close to him, it would shrink to the same size as him. There was nothing for him to be afraid of. Then, he laughed hoarsely. He looked very close to the white bear, but in fact, he had already used ethereal steps to run for a while. The white bear's paw would not hit him no matter what. The divine ability of the immortal Tao is indeed unexpected. I'm really looking forward to it. Seeing this situation that he had never encountered before, Zhang Xiaohua was no longer surprised or panicked. He was only curious and longing. After all, looking at the situation, it was as he had guessed. It should be the summons of the immortal Tao seniors. Ever since Zhang Xiaohua entered the immortal Tao, other than Nanjing Yi, he had only seen Elder Hua's remains. This should be the third person he had met. He did not know when they would meet again. With that thought, Zhang Xiaohua exerted strength in his feet and used ethereal steps. The boulder that was as tall as Zhang Xiaohua turned into a towering mountain peak. When he turned back to look at the white bear, it was already a huge creature that he had never seen in his dreams. Zhang Xiaohua arrived in front of the boulder. At this moment, it was no different from a mountain peak. It was just that the mountain peak was bare. It was the legendary smooth mountain. Looking at the flat mountain peak, Zhang Xiaohua scratched his head. There was no mountain path, no ladder, and no cave. What was he going to do? At this moment, a weak voice sounded. Fellow Taoist, please use the Earth Escape technique to enter. Earth Escape technique? I thought it couldn't be used? With that thought, Zhang Xiaohua made a hand seal and entered the mountain peak. Sure enough, he successfully entered. In front of him was a bright mountain path. It was no different from the mountain paths that Zhang Xiaohua had seen at Lingxiang Peak and other places before. Even the luminous pearls on the stone walls on both sides of the mountain path were the same. Fellow Taoist, please come up. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he unconsciously released his divine sense. However, his divine sense could only reach 10 feet. How could he see what was inside? He could only admire the mysterious voice in his heart. Hence, he tidied his clothes and bowed. I am Zhang Xiaohua. I don't have a master. I pondered and learned some immortal Tao techniques. I am here to pay my respects to Senior Immortal Tao. May I know how to address Senior Immortal Tao? Zhang Xiaohua's voice sounded for a long time, but there was no response. Could it be this senior doesn't want others to know his name? Zhang Xiaohua frowned. He had reported his real name. He was unprecedentedly sincere. Fellow Taoist, please come up, the voice sounded again. Yes, I will follow Senior's instructions. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the mountain path and walked up the stairs. The mountain path was quiet. There was no movement or danger. However, Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be careless. He used his divine sense and walked forward step by step. The mountain path wasn't straight. After turning a corner, there were two forks. The weak voice sounded again from the left mountain path. Fellow Taoist, please come this way. Yes, Senior. Zhang Xiaohua responded and walked naturally to the left mountain path. However, when he stepped on the left fork, there was a slight movement in his arms. Zhang Xiaohua looked down and saw something wriggling in his arms. Little Black? Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. Little Black had been sleeping ever since he saw it. He had never seen it open its eyes. Little Yellow had woken up long ago and was absorbing the strange black gas in the refining heart cave at Lingering Fragrance Peak. What was the reason for Little Black to suddenly wake up? Zhang Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to take out Little Black. He looked around and used his divine sense to scan the surroundings. However, there was nothing unusual. Could it be? Zhang Xiaohua subconsciously looked at the fork behind him. Sure enough, when he took out Little Black, its eyes were still closed. However, its little nose was like Little Black. It sniffed from time to time. The source was the fork behind Zhang Xiaohua. What should I do? Zhang Xiaohua scratched his chin and patted Little Black's head. Don't be anxious. This cave has an owner. I will pay my respects to the Immortal Tao Senior first. Then, I will earnestly ask him to let me take a look at the other side and find something that can wake you up. How could Little Black understand? However, it still turned its head back and sniffed with its little nose. Hee hee. Zhang Xiaohua laughed and placed Little Black back into his arms. This wasn't like Lingering Fragrance Peak where there was obviously no one in the cave. Zhang Xiaohua could do whatever he wanted. Here, he had to inform the owner beforehand. Moreover, the owner was so polite and actually called him Fellow Taoist. This form of address was really refreshing for Zhang Xiaohua. Senior, I will come over now. As he spoke, Zhang Xiaohua quickened his footsteps. After a short while, he reached the end of the mountain path. However, the end of the mountain path was empty. There was only a bare stone on the ground. Zhang Xiaohua unconsciously scratched his head and thought for a moment. He cupped his hands and said, Senior, I have arrived. Please show yourself. Place your hand on the stone tablet and refine it first. It won't be too late for me to come out after that. At this moment, the voice was lingering around the small room at the end of the mountain path. It was impossible to identify where it came from. Refine. The stone tablet? At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua realized that the rock in front of him was actually a stone tablet. He slowly walked forward and swept it with his divine sense. He could clearly see that it was really a small stone tablet. There were some strange patterns engraved on it. It looked very similar to the stone tablet in front of the Lingering Fragrance Peak. But, refining the stone tablet? Zhang Xiaohua didn't know how to do it. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to speak, The weak voice sounded from all directions. What's wrong? You haven't started refining it? Could it be that you don't know how to refine it? Oh, maybe you are below the foundation establishment stage. Sigh, I guess I'll just have to do it. Come, listen to I'll explain it to you. Following that, a large section of the stone tablet's refinement chant rang out. Zhang Xiaohua was delighted. He immediately sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He carefully memorized and tried to figure it out. The voice seemed to be afraid that Zhang Xiaohua couldn't understand it. He repeated the chant 3 times before stopping. The entire small room fell into a dead silence. Although there were many chants, Zhang Xiaohua already had some understanding of the immortal Tao. First, he memorized the chant word for word. Then, he used the time it took for 3 incense sticks to burn to understand it. However, the last sentence of the chant made things difficult for him. It was, "Spit out a mouthful of natal energy." After thinking for a moment, Zhang Xiaohua stood up and said respectfully, "Senior, I'm only at the middle stage of the qi refining realm. There's still a long way to go before I reach the foundation establishment realm. I've already comprehended the incantation that Senior taught me." "That's right. What is this life essence and how to use it?" I really don't know." As he spoke, Zhang Xiaohua's face turned slightly red. Could it be that the senior had already said that the stone tablet's refinement chant was something that a foundation establishment stage cultivator should know? Furthermore, from the senior's tone, the foundation establishment stage cultivator seemed to be a low-level cultivator. He actually didn't even know about something like natal energy. It was really embarrassing. Unexpectedly, after Zhang Xiaohua asked for a long time, the weak voice didn't speak again. Zhang Xiaohua felt that it was very strange. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart, "Could it be that the senior is angry? Maybe he thinks that my cultivation is too low? Could it be that he disdains to explain this natal energy? Or perhaps, if I use this chant to refine the stone tablet, the natal energy will naturally be spit out?" The more he thought about it, the more Zhang Xiaohua felt that he was right. He took a step forward and sat down cross-legged. Placing his right hand on the stone tablet, he activated the qi in his body and followed the chant to refine the stone tablet step by step. The chant was clearly magical. As Zhang Xiaohua's qi poured in, the stone tablet that looked like a rock slowly emitted a layer of faint golden light. This golden light followed the speed of Zhang Xiaohua's refinement and spread down bit by bit. Not bad. Fellow Taoist, you're not a disciple of the fragrant religion. The faintly discernible voice sounded again. Not a disciple of the fragrant religion? Not bad. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He originally thought that Huan Su was within the fragrant religion. The people in the 5 elements array, including the dead people, should all be disciples of the fragrant religion. This senior of the immortal Tao was actually not a disciple of the fragrant religion? This senior may have misunderstood. I am also a disciple of the fragrant religion. Yes, I am also a disciple of the fragrant religion's Mo Xingong on Lingering Fragrance Peak. Zhang Xiaohua had always been honest. He didn't want to hide this situation. However, that person didn't seem to hear him. He continued, "Fellow Taoist, please don't be offended. The purpose of refining the stone tablet is to test your cultivation and also to see if you are a disciple of the fragrant religion. I don't have any ill intentions. Moreover, refining this stone tablet will bring unexpected benefits. Consider it as my compensation for testing you for nothing." But Zhang Xiaohua felt strange. She had already said that she was a disciple of the fragrant religion. Why did he turn a deaf ear to her? However, since she had already spoken the truth, it was none of his business whether he heard her or not. With that thought in mind, Zhang Xiaohua shut her mouth and channeled her true energy into the stone tablet. -4. Chapter 9:12. Zhang Xiaohua did not have much vital energy in her body to begin with. As the stone tablet was refined, the vital energy in her meridians decreased. Fortunately, the stone tablet was not big, and the senior had said that he was only testing her cultivation to see if she was a disciple of the incense cult. Therefore, when she had exhausted all the vital energy in her body, most of the stone tablet had turned pale gold. My fellow cultivator's cultivation? Haha, it's really not ordinary. It's beyond Ai's expectations. This stone tablet is actually a little short of being refined. Don't tell me you don't have vital stones or chi replenishing pills on you? Chi replenishing pills? Zhang Xiaohua was taken aback. She said loudly, I don't have any chi replenishing pills, but I do have some vital stones. Please wait a moment, senior. As he spoke, he took out a primal stone with his other hand. He absorbed the primal energy from the primal stone and refined it in his meridians. Then, he sent the refined primal energy into the stone tablet. Before long, the stone tablet was covered in a faint golden color. It looked like a piece of gold. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were filled with envy. My fellow cultivator's cultivation is considered to have mastered the essence of cultivation. Please follow the stone tablet and completely refine it. Perhaps there will be some surprises. Zhang Xiaohua was very embarrassed. She said softly, I'm sorry to disappoint you, my fellow cultivator. I don't know what my vital energy is, and I don't know how to use it. After a long time, the voice was very surprised. My fellow cultivator, why are you not using your vital energy? Oh, could it be that my fellow cultivator doesn't know how to use it? Nonsense, Zhang Xiaohua cursed in her heart. I already told you, but you pretended not to know. What kind of person are you? In an instant, the immortal senior's lofty image was reduced by a lot. My fellow cultivator's cultivation is indeed a little low. You actually broke into the 5 elements divination formation with your late chi refinement stage cultivation. You really have a fearless spirit. Fine, I might as well just say that you don't know the meaning of death, fellow Taoist. Please take a closer look. This is how to use true life essence. It's supposed to be used by foundation establishment chi practitioners. I don't know if you'll be able to use it. If you can't, then put this stone steel into your bag of holding and wait until you reach foundation establishment before refining it. Zhang Xiaohua's face was completely red. She had no choice but to calm down and wait for the voice to explain how to use her life essence. Only then did she understand that this life essence was to be spat out like this. Although Zhang Xiaohua knew how to spit out her life origin chi, it was still extremely difficult for her to do it according to the instructions of the senior. The life origin chi seemed to be at the tip of her tongue, but she just couldn't spit it out. Fellow Taoist, there's no need to blame yourself. Cultivation time doesn't matter. Perhaps fellow Taoist has just stepped onto the path of immortality a few decades ago. It's already commendable for you to have reached the high level of chi refinement. This stone tablet is already fellow Taoists. Please keep it well. I will bring fellow Taoist over. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was greatly surprised. A few decades? It's commendable for me to reach the late stage of chi refinement in a few decades? That's true. I've only cultivated for 4 to 5 years and have only reached the middle stage of chi refinement. Wouldn't it take me a few decades to reach the late stage? But why did this senior say that I'm at the late stage of chi refinement? Just as she was thinking, a red dot suddenly appeared on the stone wall beside her. This red dot slowly rotated and expanded until it was half a person's height before stopping. When Zhang Xiaohua looked carefully, she saw that it was a continuously rotating passage. She heard the voice coming from the passage. Fellow Taoist, please come in quickly. I have limited true life essence and can't hold on for long. Through here? Zhang Xiaohua quickly put the golden stone tablet into her belt. She pointed at the passage that was half a person's height and asked, How do I get in? Don't tell me I have to crawl in? There was no reply from the other side of the passage. After a while, the voice urged her again. Fellow Taoist, please come in quickly. Otherwise, this passage will collapse. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she didn't dare to delay. She gritted her teeth and crawled in. Fortunately, although Zhang Xiaohua was tall, she was very skinny. When she crouched down, the passage wasn't too cramped. Zhang Xiaohua entered the passage and was about to crawl in when she felt that the passage began to slowly rotate again. It actually brought her forward. Io, what a divine ability. This passage can even bring people in. Zhang Xiaohua praised. Then, she realized that the other party didn't ask her to crawl in. Hence, she bent her legs and sat down cross-legged. This rotating red passage was just right. Perhaps the other party wanted Zhang Xiaohua to sit down like this. The passage wasn't long, and she reached it in a short while. When she saw the light at the exit, Zhang Xiaohua turned her head and looked behind her. It was already dark, and she couldn't see the entrance. This was a stone chamber carved out of jade. It was very similar to the secret chamber Zhang Xiaohua had seen at Lingering Fragrance Peak. On the pure white wall, there were 3 paintings. One of the paintings was a man in embroidered clothes. He held a long saber in his hand as he rode on a horse. It was as if the wind was brushing against his face. The man's clothes fluttered in the wind, making him look extremely heroic. Behind the man was a mountain rock. At this moment, the mountain rock was emitting a faint red light. It began to expand from a small point until it was half the height of a person. Then, a tall and skinny young man sitting cross-legged appeared from the light. It was Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua saw the light, the passage stopped. She jumped out of the passage. When she looked behind her, she saw the faint red light on the mountain rock gradually shrinking and finally disappearing. I actually came out from the painting? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. Then, she realized that the 3 paintings on the wall were exactly the same as the one in the white jade secret room at Lingering Fragrance Peak. Looking at the hall, she couldn't help but howl in her heart. I can't bring this secret room with me. Why did I see it? This hall is the same as Lingering Fragrance Peak. There isn't anyone here. Don't tell me I have to go somewhere else? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and said loudly, Senior, I've already reached the main hall. Do you still want to go somewhere else? No need, no need. Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment. I will come out now. As she spoke, the painting that Zhang Xiaohua walked down suddenly emitted a dazzling light. Then, a figure appeared below the painting. It was exactly the same as the one in the painting. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked when she saw it. This senior I looked at her for a long time. Zhang Xiaohua thought that he was an old man with white hair and a youthful face. Who would have thought that he was actually a man in embroidered clothes? Moreover, he came out from the painting. Zhang Xiaohua immediately went forward and bowed. I am Zhang Xiaohua. Greetings, Senior Immortal. Unexpectedly, the man ignored her and smiled faintly. Fellow Taoist, perhaps when you saw you already knew. Yes, with your chi refining late stage, you might not know. I left behind a trace of primordial spirit projection. I had already fallen long before you came here. Primordial spirit? Projection? Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. What is this? He is already dead. How can he still speak? Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua understood why there was no reaction at all when she said so much outside. It turned out that the man was just talking to himself and couldn't hear what she said. Oh, fellow Taoist, don't panic. Perhaps you haven't heard of primordial spirit projection, but you don't have to be afraid. This is only a trace of primordial spirit. It can't harm fellow Taoist, and it can't possess fellow Taoist. Moreover, this projection has been consumed for many years, and its true essence has long been exhausted. If fellow Taoist had come 2 years later, even this trace of primordial spirit projection I wouldn't have been able to see it. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she couldn't help but feel relieved. What possession? What primordial spirit? What true essence? He didn't understand any of it. However, when he heard that the true essence had been exhausted, he understood that the chi of heaven and earth was scarce, and the path of immortality had been annihilated. This man must be a path of immortality. Perhaps his cultivation was higher than Elder Hua's, but he probably couldn't survive and had already passed away. Elder Hua left behind his remains, but this man left behind a primordial spirit projection. However, Zhang Xiaohua was still respectful. She bowed and said, I am a junior, and I really don't know anything. Please enlighten me, senior. Then, she looked up and down at the light projection. Although the light projection was the size of a real person, it looked very illusory. There were even many places that were blank. It must be the so-called lack of true essence that prevented it from being drawn. Actually, this was also one of the reasons. When she saw that Zhang Xiaohua was standing at the side of the man, and the man was actually talking to the front instead of directly facing Zhang Xiaohua, she knew that it wasn't a real person. Sure enough, the light projection ignored Zhang Xiaohua's words and continued. I left behind this primordial spirit projection to leave traces of me so that my descendants could find this place. However, this should be the territory of the fragrant religion. How can the disciples of the Shundao sect come and go as they please? Moreover, after my death, this five elements formation must have become the forbidden area of the fragrant religion. Their own disciples can't enter, so how can the Shundao sect come? Moreover, even if the disciples of the Shundao sect found this place and had the opportunity to meet me, who knows how many years it would have been? Who would still remember me? Shundao sect? Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, Senior. There doesn't seem to be a Shundao sect in this Jianghu. The glowing figure continued, therefore, this poor Taoist thinks that as long as you are not a disciple of the fragrant cult, this poor Taoist can tell you about my own matters. Please bring this poor Taoist's news back to the Godly Knife sect. But Senior, this disciple doesn't know where the Shundao sect is. Zhang Xiaohua forgot that the light projection couldn't hear her voice. At this moment, the light projection waved the knife in his hand and sighed. He pointed at the stone wall and said, Fellow Taoist, have you seen the 4 paintings on the wall? 4 paintings? Zhang Xiaohua was surprised and said, There are only 3 paintings on the wall. Oh, there should be another painting in the empty space, but it was taken away by someone. -4. Chapter 9:13. Zhang Xiaohua could only say this to himself. The light figure ignored him and said, Fellow Taoist, look at these 4 portraits carefully. If fellow Taoist cultivation was a bit higher, or if you were a direct disciple of one of the 3 sects, you would have seen them in your own sect. Alas, this poor Taoist has forgotten that this world is so big, and this poor Taoist's primordial spirit projection is about to be exhausted. I don't know how long it has been since this poor Taoist has fallen. The cultivation inheritance has blossomed, and there are more than 3 or 4 sects in this world. Cultivation? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned again. He thought to himself, what is cultivation? Is it related to the immortal Tao? No matter what, as long as you are not a disciple of the fragrant religion or the misty school, it is fine. Damn, Zhang Xiaohua felt that it was ridiculous. If it was another sect, like the Shundao sect, he would have never heard of it. He was not a disciple of any of those sects, but he was closely related to the misty school and the fragrant religion. Let's talk about the misty school. Everything about his immortal Tao was related to the misty school. Even the Carefree Heart Sutra was found in the library of the Misty School. Even Zhang Xiaohua himself didn't believe that he had nothing to do with the Misty School. Then there was the fragrant religion. Although his inner chi wasn't from the fragrant religion, but his lover was a disciple of Emo Xiangong, and he was also a disciple of Emo Xiangong. How could he not have anything to do with the fragrant religion? But then, Zhang Xiaohua's head buzzed. He thought that he might not be a disciple of the Misty School. The Carefree Heart Sutra might not be a Misty School cultivation method. He had never practiced any other immortal Tao mental cultivation method. What spirit guiding technique? What enchanting finger? They were all methods of using vital chi. The most basic mental cultivation method was the Carefree Heart Sutra. His vital chi was also refined from the Carefree Heart Sutra. Since he had used his vital chi to refine the stone tablet, this man had already determined that it was not a mental cultivation method of the fragrant sect. Of course, at the same time, the possibility of it being a mental cultivation method of the ethereal sect was ruled out. Moreover, if the Carefree Heart Sutra was really a mental cultivation method of the ethereal sect, why would sect leader O casually place it in the library? Why would he let him take it? Zhang Xiaohua slapped his forehead again. Now that he had thought things through, coupled with the fact that he gradually understood the reason behind the annihilation of the ethereal sect, Zhang Xiaohua's mind unconsciously opened up. Finally, he understood something. Could this Carefree Heart Sutra also be the treasure trove of the ethereal sect? Thinking about the time, it's about time. I'm lucky. The cultivation method that the Misty School obtained from the treasure trove was actually snatched by me. I'm really lucky. Zhang Xiaohua sighed inwardly at her luck. Also, it just so happens that the martial arts senior of the Misty School wrote the Carefree Heart Sutra himself. This is really a coincidence. Otherwise, even if I obtained the Carefree Heart Sutra, I wouldn't have been able to take it away from the library. Immortal fate. Is this the legendary immortal fate? Instantly, Zhang Xiaohua understood the meaning of, if it's yours, it's yours. Even if you don't take it, it will still end up in your hands. If it's not yours, it's not yours. Even if you use all your tricks, you won't be able to obtain it. Oh, right. I forgot to tell you. Luckily, you're not a disciple of the Tenryu sect. Otherwise, I's spiritual beast wouldn't have been able to bring you here. The light figure shrugged and said. However, this man kept referring to himself as a humble Taoist, which made Zhang Xiaohua feel, how should he put it? It was very uncoordinated. Although this humble Taoist sounded very unfathomable, it was extremely awkward when it came from the mouth of a ruffian. Well, please don't be annoyed. I just want to make things clear so that you won't have any doubts. After all, I'm only a projection of my essence soul and can't answer your questions. Therefore, I have to explain in detail. Although she knew that this was only a projection of his primordial spirit and that the man had died long ago, Zhang Xiaohua was still very polite. She bowed and said, I wouldn't dare. Senior, I've never met an immortal Dao senior face to face. I'm willing to listen to what you've said. Please continue. Then, which sect do you belong to? Zhang Xiaohua shrugged and thought to herself, even if I say it, can you hear me? However, she was still very respectful and said, I got an immortal Dao mental cultivation method. I thought it was from the Misty school, but after listening to what seniors said, should be ownerless. Therefore, I don't belong to any sect. As for the fragrant cult, I said that I was a guardian disciple, but it was only a few days ago. I didn't teach you any immortal Dao mental cultivation method. If I'm talking about a sect, oh, I want to start a Beidou school. Haha, please don't laugh at me. Well, it's a good sect. Although I can't hear the name of the sect you mentioned, your cultivation is not high, but you can break into the divine 5 elements formation and be brought here by the spiritual beast. Just talking about immortal fate, you're much stronger than I and the others. Perhaps, the thing in the core of the divine 5 elements formation has some fate with you. The thing in the core? Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. Could it be the thing mentioned by Ren Wufeng of the Ruijin Palace? By the way, I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Wan Wuxin, a disciple of the Taibai sect side branch. How should I address you, fellow Taoist? Greetings, Senior Huan. I'm Zhang Xiaohua. Well, I'm Beidou School's founding disciple. Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy. This introduction was much better than Wan Wuxin's introduction. Good name. Wan Wuxin in the light and shadow clapped his hands and said, Fellow Taoist, your name will definitely be passed down through the ages in the future. Ha ha ha. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help laughing. She cupped her hands and said, Senior Huan, you must be joking. Everyone said that I's name is unpleasant to hear. It's similar to a girl's name, and I was ridiculed a lot. You can't hear it, so why are you laughing at? I was a good name. Zhang Xiaohua casually said it. Fellow Taoist, are you surprised? Do you know the name I? The man in the light and shadow said with a smile. What? How is that possible? I've never heard of it before. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head very honestly. Yes, that's right. Fellow Taoist, you have a good memory. I'm the founder of the Shindao sect, one of the 3 great sect leaders who founded the cultivation world. Oh no, it's the 4 great sect leaders. No matter how you look at it, you have to count the Tenryu sect. Oh no, that's not right. The Dalan Temple should also be counted. Although the abbot of the Dalan Temple never shows himself, the Dalan Temple is still a part of the cultivation world, so it has to be counted. Seeing Wan Wuxin add the sects one by one, from the 3 great sect leaders to the 5 great sect leaders, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but smile. It seemed that even the seniors of the Tao of Immortality valued their reputation very much. However, Zhang Xiaohua knew about the Misty School, the Incense sect, the Dalan Temple, and the Tenryu sect. She had never heard of the Shindao sect. Could it be the same as the Misty School? Was it also a great sect of the Tao of Immortality that was later destroyed? Yes, that should be the case. Perhaps in another 50 years, the name Misty School would no longer exist in the Jianghu. Presumably, the 5 great sects are now very famous in the cultivation world. Wan Wuxin said proudly. Back then, I, Yu Mingxin, and Yang Haoya joined hands to chase down the remnants of the Devil Realm and came to this world. Cultivation had yet to sprout in this world. Now that the cultivation world is flourishing, I also have a huge amount of merit. What is all this about? Zhang Xiaohua was completely dumbfounded. Putting aside the cultivation world, this person who looked like a man of the Jianghu was actually the founder of the Xindao sect, a super sect like the incense sect. In other words, before the Tao of immortality had even begun, he already had such a high cultivation. Yes, he came from the outside to this world and single-handedly established the Tao of immortality bit by bit. Moreover, according to Wan Wuxin's words, this world, the Tao of immortality that had been destroyed for 10,000 years had taken shape because of their arrival. 10,000 years was too long. Seize every minute. Zhang Xiaohua had vaguely heard this before. However, in her heart, a few decades in this world was long enough. The primordial spirit projection in the light in front of her had actually existed for 10,000 years. Oh no, it was more than 10,000 years. As for how long it had been, it was hard to say. Ha ha ha. The man in the light laughed. He waved the knife in his hand and asked, Fellow Taoist, are you frightened? Zhang Xiaohua opened her dry mouth and didn't know how to answer. This fellow Taoist really thought too highly of him. She didn't know how late she was as his junior. The man seemed to have known Zhang Xiaohua's mood tens of thousands of years ago. He smiled and said, There is a seniority in the cultivation world. As long as you step into the cultivation world, you are a fellow Taoist. I don't know when you came here. I can't just call you a junior, can I? Well, fellow Taoist, since you are also a cultivator, you must be from one of the 5 major sections. You should be from the 2 major sections. Perhaps you are a disciple of one of the 2 major sections. Of course, your primordial spirit is not from the Xindao sect. It is most likely from the Dalan temple. This poor Taoist will tell you about the origin of this cultivation world. Zhang Xiaohua was very interested. She cupped her hands and said, In that case, I will also thank you, Senior Huan. As she spoke, Zhang Xiaohua sat down cross-legged, looking as if she wanted to listen to a story. Sure enough, the light in the light also looked up at the sky. He sighed and said, In the past, he also looked like he wanted to tell a story. Once upon a time, in a place called the Ruins, there were 3 famous sections. Their names were the Misty School, the Incense School, and the Xindao sect. Well, fellow Taoists need not be confused. We all came from that place. I am a disciple of the Xindao sect. The Xindao sect is a branch of the Taibai sect. As he spoke, the silhouette raised his head and heaved a long sigh just like the real person. -4. Chapter 9:14. The Ruins was originally a very peaceful place. It was just a small corner of the entire cultivation world and was connected to other places by teleportation arrays. The 3 major sects and the other small sects can be considered to be living in harmony and peace. It can be said to be a paradise. I was a second-generation disciple of the Xindao sect. My aptitude wasn't the best, but it was above average. I was rather favored by the sect master and received a lot of teachings. Yang Haoya of the Misty School was also a second-generation disciple. I met him in the process of hunting demonic beasts. I helped him hunt demonic beasts and obtained their demonic cores. Thus, we became friends. Later, for some unknown reason, there was a problem with the teleportation array of the Ruins. A large number of people from the Devil Realm borrowed the wrong teleportation array to invade the Ruins. The people from the Devil Realm all practiced demonic techniques and fed on the flesh and vital essence of cultivators. They were the mortal enemies of the cultivation world. Therefore, the cultivators of the Ruins spread the news to the entire cultivation world and organized to resist the invasion of the Devil Realm. Yu Mingxin, the second-generation female disciple of the incense cult, met us at this time. I, Yang Haoya, and Yu Mingxin were in a small group. We led more than 10 people from other sects to kill the mortal enemies of the Devil Realm. I remember it very clearly. That day, more than 10 of us were lying in ambush near the teleportation array, preparing to kill a pair of patrolling Devil Realm people. However, a person suddenly came out of the teleportation array. "Oh, fellow Taoist, you can look at the portraits on the wall. The one on the far right is the person from the devil realm. Other than Ai's portrait, the one dressed as a scholar is Yang Haoya of the Misty School. The masked woman is Yu Mingxin of the Incense Cult. That man from the devil realm is very powerful. As soon as he came out of the formation, he sensed our ambush. However, he pretended not to know and waited for us to get close. He didn't wait for us to set up the formation before he ruthlessly attacked. At that time, many disciples died. This humble Taoist, Yang Haoya, and Yu Mingxin hastily fought and couldn't gain much advantage. Later on, they relied on their numbers to severely injure the devil world's people. As for our side, other than I and the other two, everyone else died. The man from the devil realm retreated with heavy injuries. Naturally, I and the other two couldn't let him go, so we chased after him. Who knew that the man didn't escape through the teleportation array, but into the wilderness? I and the others were overjoyed, thinking that we could kill him, but when we got close and wanted to use our handy magic weapons to kill him, we found that the man from the devil realm was really cunning. He detonated a magic weapon, injuring all of us. His magic weapon's lethality was so great that it cleared out an open space in the wilderness where no one had ever been before, revealing a mysterious teleportation array underground. Although I and the other two were also seriously injured, the man from the devil realm was no match for us. He didn't care about anything and just jumped into the teleportation array. That teleportation array was also strange. Perhaps it was activated by the explosion of his magic weapon, but it didn't use primordial stones to operate automatically. Seeing the man from the devil realm enter, I and the others were also hesitant, but thinking of making a contribution, they followed. Alas, who knew? I don't know if it was the teleportation array's problem or the magic weapon's activation, but when I and the others came out of the teleportation array, it was actually another world. It's actually not the cultivation world that I was familiar with. Fellow Taoist, don't be surprised. When I and the others came out of the teleportation array, it was a boiling lake. If I and the others didn't have magic weapons to protect their bodies, they would have been burned to death. At first, I and the others were just surprised. When they came to other places in the cultivation world, as long as they found the right direction, they could fly back. Unfortunately, after I and the other two recovered from their injuries, they found that everything here in I's cultivation world were not the same place. So, we thought that we were in another world. Another world? Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. Just now, he didn't understand what Wan Wuxin said. Now that he heard it, he understood a little. The place where they lived was not the same place as his, but he had no idea why or why it was not the same place. Then, Wan Wuxin said again, after arriving here, I and the others immediately looked for the man from the devil realm, but he had disappeared without a trace. After several years of understanding, I and the other two found that there were no traces of cultivation here. There were only some clues in the dense forest of the mountain peak where I and the others came from. However, the teleportation array where I came from could not be activated no matter what. Even if we put primordial stones in the array, it would not work. So, I and the others could only stay in this world. In the light and shadow, Wan Wuxin's face was suffused with a wry smile. Fellow Taoist, at that time, the world was not like this. There were cultivation world cultivators everywhere, and there were sects for you to cultivate. Even the most superficial martial arts were not here. When I and the other two saw that there was no hope of returning to the cultivation world, they unconsciously wanted to take root here. But before we could do it, we suddenly found that a kind of fist art became popular here. Needless to say, it was taught by the man from the devil realm. Cultivators in the cultivation world have always been partial to magic treasures and true essence, and then there are flying swords. Fist art is not useful in a fight between cultivators, so cultivators have never practiced fist art. Most of the people in the devil realm cultivate their bodies, so fist art is the first choice. I and the others also know that the fist art that is popular here is the Great Heavenly Cycle Star Fist, which is a relatively famous fist art in the devil realm. The man from the devil realm may be the originator of fist art in this world. And, not long after, another piece of news came. The man from the devil realm established his own Tenryu sect and called himself Deity. It is the world's #1 devil cultivation sect. I and the other two were originally not this Deity's opponent. Now that he wants to establish his own sect to develop his strength, we can only wait to be captured. Thinking of this, I and the other two also established their own section Sai, of course, named it the Shundao sect after I's original sect. Yuming Xin established the Incense School, and Yang Haoya established the Misty School. They are the three cultivation world's great sects. However, the most peculiar thing is that not long after our three sects were established, someone else established the Dalan Temple, which can actually compete with us as equals. I and the others thought that the Dalan Temple is related to the Tenryu sect, but the Dalan Temple's techniques are not the same as the Tenryu sects. Moreover, there is a faint sense of restraint. Therefore, although we have never seen the monk who founded the Dalan Temple, we can unanimously believe that this Dalan Temple is not related to the Tenryu sect. It is possible that it was established by a cultivator from our cultivation world. The establishment of the three sects, no, the five sects can be considered to have introduced the cultivation world's techniques here, creating a precedent for cultivation. Although we can't return to the cultivation world, we can pass down our sect's techniques here. We can die without regrets. I and the other two were originally mortal enemies of the Tenryu sect's Deity. However, after coming here, we can't return, so our hatred gradually faded. The Tenryu sect was established at the southwest border, which is far away from our three sects. Normally, we don't fight with each other. I reckon that it is because I and the other three restrained each other that the cultivation world is flourishing now. Wan Wuxin was very proud in the light and shadow. Zhang Xiaohua was almost embarrassed to tell him. What cultivation world? 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 There are no such things now. There is only the legendary Immortal Tao and the legends of Immortal Tao now. The martial Tao is flourishing. Immediately, Wan Wuxin was lonely again. However, although we have done such a great deed, we didn't get any news about our sect or our hometown. We don't know how the battle at the ruins is like, and how are our sects and families. For this, I and the other two discussed and wanted to build a transmission array to see if it could lead to the ruins. However, the transmission array needs to be located by the divine sense of two locations. I and the other two came in a hurry and didn't have time to make a mark there. Therefore, we had no choice but to let our disciples inform Deity and invite him to build it together. What I didn't expect was that Sakura was actually the same as us. He also had this intention a long time ago. The four of us just needed to strike a deal and put aside all the grievances of our early years. We swore on our inner demons that we would not offend each other. Only then did we form an alliance and jointly build the teleportation array. Yes, these four portraits were drawn one by one when we formed an alliance. It's a pity that I died long ago and only a trace of my primordial spirit is left. What about them? They probably turned into ashes and fell into the 6 realms of reincarnation. Sigh, how could the transmission array be easy to build? Even if Deity has the special ability to tear space, his knowledge is still shallow. The three of us have high magic power, but our understanding of space is far inferior to Deity's. We can only be his assistants. That day, I was thinking that the legendary foolish old man could move mountains. Perhaps we couldn't do it fully, but we left behind our orthodoxy. As the cultivation world slowly develops, there will be a day when the transmission array will be successfully built. Yes, fellow Taoist, I wonder if the array has been built? Zhang Xiaohua scratched his head. Although he knew that he was just asking, he didn't dare to be careless. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior, please no. I only know that the Immortal Tao has been destroyed. Even if the teleportation formation you mentioned was fixed, it would have become a flower from 10,000 years ago. Who would still remember it? I really miss home." Wan Wuxin looked at the sky. When I left the Shundao sect, junior sister had just, haha, I've made a fool of myself. The light figure said again, people's wishes are always beautiful, but reality is really cruel. Even for cultivators like us, it's the same. At that time, I and the others were wholeheartedly focused on building the transmission array. However, just as the array was beginning to take shape, something unexpected happened. Because of this, I and the others found an excuse to stop the construction of the transmission array and let Tion temporarily return to his Tenryu sect. I think fellow Taoists should have already guessed what this matter was. There are more chapters. -4. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.